Thank you so much for coming to this interactive panel on accessibility in audio tech. I thought we would start with just a brief exercise, and I'm going to do it as well, don't worry, and it's not very long. Close your eyes and take out your phone. No one's going to steal it, don't worry. With your eyes closed, unlock it and tap where you think the phone icon is. And now tap where you think the keypad icon is if you wanted to ring someone. Open your eyes. Where are we at? So I'm on BBC. Oh, that's pretty close. That's pretty close. I'm on BBC News, so that's just not really useful. But imagine if we were doing that on an old-style phone with tactile buttons. I bet everyone could have done it right away. I remember the days of being at school, texting under the table. And I think that says something about accessibility. So I took inspiration for that little demo from Sheila Moran, and she did an amazing TED Talk all about, well, she called it Unnatural Selection, Survival in the Digital Age. And she used that example. Then she also talked about her own experience of being an editor at the BBC, a job that she loved, and she was primarily working in the analog days. Digital audio came along, and it was totally inaccessible, and she basically had to give up the job that she loved, which is a real shame. And the big point that she makes in that TED Talk is that development doesn't necessarily mean accessibility for everyone. It's not universal progress unless you involve the communities that you're developing for. And I think that really struck a chord with me because I guess I found myself in a similar position 20 years later than Sheila had. So I'm a partially sighted mixing engineer, producer, and I guess in certain ways I struggled to get into the audio industry because there were accessibility barriers within the software and stuff like that. And I had the realization, actually, Sheila went through that 20 years earlier and, time had passed and stuff had got better, but it still wasn't totally solved, and it probably never will be, but there's still work to be done for sure. So fast forward probably another 10 years, I'm still a producer and a mixing engineer, but I also now work at RNIB, the Royal National Institute of Blind People, as music support officer, and I founded Sound Without Sight, which is an online community hub for blind and partially sighted musicians, where we aim to bring together supporting information and support people into those kinds of roles. And just to preface the session, really, give you some insight into how we programmed the content. We wanted to create or program content that was interesting to both product developers and users with disabilities, I guess recognizing that there's a minority which is an overlap, right? But we want to see that overlap get much bigger over time so that accessibility just becomes a natural consideration within the workforce. So hopefully we've got content that does appeal to both those groups. I guess just to acknowledge, we won't delve into loads and loads of code. So if that's what you're expecting, sorry. So what is coming up? We've got a series of lightning talks based on the feedback that we got from last year's ADC. So it's not the same thing again. It's all stuff around that content from last year. So we've got an amazing panel. You've got musicians, accessibility consultants, developers, and organizations that are driving change within the industry. Accessibility is a massive topic, and we couldn't cover it in one afternoon in its entirety, but we're going to explore barriers and potential opportunities for progress. We're going to share practical examples of where stuff's working well already, and then we're going to have a discussion together of what we can all do to move stuff forward. So just to pick up on some key themes, if you weren't at ADC last year, we had a big workshop talking about stuff that could be better, really. And some of the themes that came out were to make user interfaces visually clear, but also to tame complexity within them. To make products tactile as much as possible. So if you're software, this might be compatible with keyboard navigation. It might be compatible with automation parameters that can be used with control surfaces. It might be compatibility with MIDI, or if, for example, with hardware, it might be using stepped encoders so that people can feel when they're making changes. We also talked about making products talk. So for today, we're talking about screen reader support. And once you've done these things, make sure you tell people about it so that people know that these things exist and these solutions are there. And all of this stuff is underpinned by the social model of disability. So I'd like to welcome our first two presenters for the afternoon, Liza and Tim Yates.
Hi folks, lovely to see you all here. My name's Tim Yates. I work for a charity called Drake Music. We're a charity that's been going for about 30 years or so, working at the intersection of music, technology and disability. And I run the research and innovation program, focusing on accessible instruments and accessible music tech, making sure that everybody has an instrument and the music tech that they need to be able to make music.
Hi, I'm Liza Beck. I'm a performer, composer and producer. And I'm really interested in where is the line between science and magic and exploring that in musical form. I live with music-triggered epilepsy, so I'm often walking that line in everyday life. And I've made an instrument, the robo recorder, inspired by my glitchy brain, which we're going to hear a little bit more about later on.
Fab. So we're just doing a short intro about the social model of disability, which is an absolutely fundamental idea and set of concepts that underpins all of the work that happens in kind of disability rights and disability advocacy in the UK. This is slightly wordy. I'm kind of anticipating that this is something that you could maybe take a photo of and read later. There's obviously a lot of theory about the social model, so we're only going to skitter over the surface of it, really. It's an idea that arose out of the disability rights movement in the 1980s. So it's very much led by the people who led that movement, and it just really talks about a different way of thinking about disability that makes it much easier and better for everybody, and so we can make some more progress. The fundamental idea is that disability is not something that resides with the individual, it's something that resides in society, and it's society not providing the things that people need to do what they want to do. That's the problem, not any individual with in any particular condition at all, in any situation at all. And so really the onus is on society as a whole to make things and do things and organise things in a way that everybody can access. And so what that does is it takes the responsibility away from the individual themselves to kind of be fixed and those kinds of things, and it puts the responsibility on everybody to ensure that whenever we do things, whenever we set things up, whenever we're putting on events or whatever, that accessibility is taken into account, and everybody who wants to access that thing can access it, regardless of any other circumstances. So that's I suppose the main underpinning idea of the social model. Liza, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, I don't think so. I think we can carry on. Let's
move on. There we go.
I want to compare and contrast what Tim has just introduced us to with the medical model, and I want to ask you a question. What do you do when you get ill? Anyone? Yeah?
See a doctor.
Exactly, yeah, you go to the doctor, right? And what do you expect the doctor to do? Something, right. Yeah. You go to the doctor and you expect them to fix you. You expect them to make you better. And that's what I did when I got epilepsy. I went to the doctor and they gave me some medication. And they said, well, the trouble is, you're still broken, right? Something's still not working. And that is the medical model of disability, What do you do when the medicine is not working? And the difference between the medical model and the social model is that we're thinking about society creating the barriers, as Tim was just saying. So an example of that with my epilepsy, when I play certain patterns of notes, then it triggers my hands to twitch. It's completely useless in the context of playing classical music. But what if I'm not trying to play classical music? If I'm improvising, then actually you can see that as a positive thing. In fact, you can see it as a creative tool. And that is the difference really between the two models. And I think the key here is thinking about that contrast between professional expertise and lived experience. And I can tell you that as someone with 1 in 10 million condition, that any medical professional you see will know less about it than me, and that is totally understandable. But it's not just true of me, it's true of everybody in terms of everyone is the expert on their own body. And the medical model actually doesn't really stand up when it comes to understanding people's experiences of their own lives. And this next point, Tim, actually came up over the last week and a half about that idea of a cure. And when I went to the doctor with epilepsy, I wanted a cure. You know, I was desperate for a cure. I would have done anything for a cure because I couldn't do what I was doing anymore. And, you know, it makes you think about how far you've come from that. Because I was out with a friend at the Louvre, and I'm entitled to free entry at the Louvre because I'm disabled. So I showed my card and I said, oh, I'm disabled. And she said to me afterwards, she said, don't you feel a bit weird saying you're disabled? And I just thought, wow, that is the medical model of disability. It's the idea that it's not normal to be disabled. And actually, I've come so far away from that now that the question really took me aback. And I just thought, what do you mean weird? You know, it's just a fact. I am disabled. And it's normal for me to be, you know, this is what I am like. And it's not a tragedy. Now, the medical model is framing it as it's a tragedy, it's a shame. Isn't it awful that I've got this, you know, that I've got epilepsy? And that's really what I was getting from her. And that's not what I feel at all now. I think, well, actually, this is such a gift and it's enabling me to do things that I would never have done otherwise. And again, another key difference with the social model. Because as Tim was saying, what we really need is we need people to help us. And we all have needs and we all need people to help us to fulfill our potential and for society to make us fulfilling our potential possible.
Yeah, fab, absolutely. So the next slide, which I've pressed the wrong button. There we go. There we go. God, you can tell I'm a techie, right? I managed to make a projector. So these two kind of ideas play out a lot in development and instrument development. You're developing products and things like that. And so the kind of medical model version of instrument and product development is whereby some engineer has an idea, a non-disabled engineer perhaps has an idea of something that they think might be good. They spend years making it. They build a thing and then they put it out into the world and go, here you go, here's your solution. Here's your accessibility solution. And nearly always, in fact, basically always, it doesn't work. Because the central thing, and it's obvious when you say it, but it isn't actually done in practice a lot of the time, is that you need to involve everybody in the design process from the very beginning. Because if you don't, then the solutions that you come up with are not going to meet their needs. I mean, it's obvious, really, but it just doesn't happen. And so the top on this slide, the top principle that applies all the time to absolutely everything is maybe the central principle of the social model is nothing about us without us. So anything that is being designed as an accessibility thing or not being designed specifically as an accessibility thing should always include disabled people, anybody who might be a user group of this product in the development process to make sure that their voices are heard and that their needs and requirements are built into the product as you go along, whatever it happens to be. The other important element is that everybody in that process is an expert and should be treated as such. The person who's going to use a thing, they know what they need way better than anybody else. And so you have to talk to that person and ask them and find and explore with them how that might work. Because if you don't, you won't make something that meets their needs. And that also speaks to the power dynamics. You need a kind of equal power dynamic. Everybody who's involved in the process should be equally treated as experts in this context. And often this just simply doesn't happen. And it's really important that it does, because that is really the fundamental route to making successful things that work for people. And so the co-design and disabled-led development is really the kind of product design side of the social model, and that's how we prefer. And when we're working at Drake Music, this is what we always do. We're always making a thing for an individual or a group of individual to meet something that we know that they need because they said that they need it, and that they are the people who are really driving the direction and of the development to make sure that at the end of it you have something that's as successful as it can possibly be. So I think that's it's really central to any kind of development of anything, really. And also, you just get different, new, interesting, innovative ideas if you work that way, because you're coming at it from different angles. You don't necessarily come at it, you come at it with a completely different set of assumptions. There are new ideas being brought in from lots of different perspectives, and you can end up with lots of really interesting, you do end up with lots of interesting things. Many of the things that we take for granted started life as accessibility aids. The typewriter is an example, which I didn't realize. Somebody told me the other day that the typewriter was an accessibility product originally. And there are countless other examples out there where that's been true.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk about another example, which is my instrument, the Robo Recorder. And this is where things get a little bit freaky, because I'm going to talk to you about the inside of my head. If we go to the next
flip to the next slide. There we go.
Now, you can see various wiggly lines here, horizontal wiggly lines. Now, so far, so good. But when those faint wiggles start getting really spiky, that's when you know there's a problem. And that is the medical problem. It's called a spike and slow wave discharge for any neurologists or wannabe neurologists in the room. Now, when I was diagnosed with epilepsy, they did lots of these tests, and they said, look, your brain's short-circuiting. And the problem is, when it short-circuits, it's causing damage. And when it causes damage, it's going to short-circuit some more. And actually, if you carry on playing, then what's going to happen one day is you're going to wake up. You're going to go to bed at night, and you're not going to wake up, and you're going to die in your sleep. So obviously, I was pretty scary stuff, so I stopped playing. The problem is it was my job. So what did I do? I actually went to medical school, and I studied all of the diseases in some detail. And what I found was that the brain is plastic, and it can be retrained. And what I wanted to do was, I wanted to retrain my brain, but I didn't know how. Now, I started by singing and writing songs, but then one day, I went on Facebook and someone had put an advert saying, I need someone to play in a music video. And they said, the music's super easy. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to test this out. And I skipped lectures, don't tell anyone that I did that. I skipped lectures and I went and I played. And do you know what I found? That when I was improvising, there wasn't a problem. So I was able to just play freely. I could actually jump over the short circuit. I could feel when it was going to happen, and I could go past it. And I ended up, the drummer from that band, the Memory Band, introduced me to James Holden, and ended up touring with his band. And we were touring all across Europe. And at that point, I thought, you know what? I want to make something out of this. I want to tell my story in music. And I'd been awarded some money by Help Musicians UK, their fusion fund, to make this happen. And I was surrounded by all these electronic instruments, you know, modular synths, all of this stuff. And I didn't have a clue about any of it. I was a complete novice. I'd never been on a DAW. I didn't know what DAW stood for, actually, for probably a couple of years. And we're talking about 2017, 2018, so it's not that long ago. I'm sure there's people in this room who've been working with technology since day dot. Well, I was completely ignorant. But I was surrounded by all this wonderful stuff. And I was thinking, if I'm going to make something about a short-circuiting brain, it's got to be a cyborg instrument. And so I was talking to the people around me. And at that time, Leafcutter John was on James's label. And he said to me, do you know what, I'm making a woodwind synth. Do you want to come and try it out? So I went to his studio and he showed it to me. It was basically a pressure sensor, some copper tape contacts, and he was using this to make electronic sounds. And I said to him, I said, John, this is really cool. And it does sound cool. It's called the Sexy Phone, and you can check it out on his sets. It is a cool instrument, but I said, you've missed out the woodwind instrument. You know, some of us have spent years learning to play this stuff, and yeah, my hands may be a bit twitchy, but I want to be able to do that. And in fact, I think what would be really cool for me is if we put all of this gear, the circuit board and the copper tape and everything, if we took this and we put it on the recorder, and then I'd be able to play the recorder and I'd be able to control the computer at the same time. And he said, well, okay, that sounds really cool. And you know what? If you go away and think about how you want to design that, and you do the design yourself, then I'll show you how the teensy works, and I'll show you how to solder it on. And so I did that, and we came up with the Robo Recorder, which is on the next slide. That is how the Robo Recorder was born. So really, this is the co-design process. It was, you know, I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't have a clue how to do it. And John was doing something completely different. And then, you know, we were helping each other. I was helping him with his design process. He was helping me with creating my instrument. And this instrument, you know, it's been on display at the Science Museum in London and Manchester. It was actually inducted to the BBC Radio 6 Museum. And it enables me to do things I would never have been able to do otherwise. So I'm able to play, multiple synths. And the idea of the positioning of the copper tape was that when my hands are twitching, not only can I control it when they're not twitching, but when they're twitching, it's going to trigger something cool, because there's nothing worse than when you can't control your hands and you're on stage in the middle of a concert, right? You want something to happen. And this is actually making that problem into a creative tool. And I just think that the generosity of the dev community is just really exemplified by John's approach in terms of sharing knowledge, but also in terms of listening and helping someone who had absolutely no technical knowledge whatsoever at that point. Now, since then, I've spent a long time locked in a small room with various pieces of software and probably can hold my own. But I think really that this is what we all need to be doing. And I hope that I can be generous with my time as well in helping other people to find their own technology solutions. Oh yeah, that's just my QR code. If you want to get hold of me and do that, yeah. That's not actually part of it.
Amazing. Well, that's been a really, really good intro. And I think just to broaden out the conversation slightly, I wanted to invite our next speaker. So Mxshi Mo, please join us on the stage when you're ready. No rush, but we're going to spend the next 25 minutes-ish talking about general, structural barriers to accessing music technology. So next slide, please, Tim.
Next slide. There we go.
We'll leave this up as just a holding slide. Yeah, thank you. We'll talk about some opportunities as well to be part of the solution, hopefully, moving forward. So perhaps whilst Mxshi is getting to the stage, should we pick a topic?
Yeah.
The one that we wanted to start with really was just, acknowledging the good work that has happened and the appreciation within the community for all that great work. I think we've heard from several different developers that it can be a bit scary to get started with accessibility. You're never going to get to that version 2 if you don't try the version 1. And I think just doing that is a massive, massive way towards progress. And I think getting the community involved at that stage as well, once you've got a first prototype, or even before that, people love developers getting involved with accessibility and involving the community. So just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone in this room who is already engaged in accessibility in some way. And Mxshi, hello, how are you?
Well, and yourself?
Good, very well, thank you. So we've heard a little bit about Liza's story there. Just wanted to give you some time to talk about your own story and what you do as a producer and a musician and how you work.
All right. First of all, thank you for having me. And special thanks to Sophie Harris and L Acoustics for making this happen. My name is Mxshi Mo. I'm from Pietermaritzburg, South Africa. I'm a visually impaired, self-taught electronic music producer. Basically, my process has been trial and error. I use mainly Ableton Live. I use it because of the accessibility features. And right before I came across Ableton Live, I think I might have tried all DAWs that were available at the time, and until I came across Ableton.
And I guess one of the reasons behind that was the way that you could use it in conjunction with Ableton Push, is that right? To make it more tactile, the music production process?
Yes. It definitely, when the Push tool came out, it definitely lit a light bulb. Because I realized that there's a whole lot of things that I could do on the actual device instead of trying to look for the mouse cursor. Because when I work, it's a combination of an inverted contrast, or dark mode as they call it nowadays, and zooming in, keyboard shortcuts. But with the Push, everything is just laid out. There's a undo, there's copy, there's paste, and also it has a sort of like a step sequencer. I don't have to click in the notes on the piano roll. Mm-hmm. So that hardware and software integration really accelerated my production. It allowed me to push my sound further and experiment. There was a lot of happy mistakes, obviously, while I was still trying to learn the device itself. And every time there's a new update with Ableton Live, I like the fact that it also correlates with the Push. Mm-hmm. You understand? So it's not like there's just a software update, and then the hardware has to catch up later. It sort of updates in parallel, for lack of a better word.
Amazing. Well, we've got so many things that we spoke about ahead of the session, and actually software updates was one of them. Liza, did you want to jump in and talk about software updates?
Oh yeah, software. I just want to also agree with you that Ableton is fantastic. I love Ableton, and also the Max community, because if you want to do something in Ableton, then it's guaranteed that someone is doing it or they're talking about it, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful piece of software. And it's funny that the way you use Ableton is so different from the way I use it, and yet we're both able to use the software to achieve exactly what we want to achieve.
Yes.
Because, you want a, very tactile interface, and actually what I want is something completely hands-free and, wireless controls, mini-bappable, and that's what Ableton gives us. I think it's interesting in terms of updates, as you say, it's really appreciated that continuity in terms of updates. Equally, I think for those of us who are hacking a little bit into the back end, and sometimes there's a good reason to use the back end, particularly you're working from Max for live and you want to work with Ableton devices. I'm thinking particularly resonators. There's a recent update where the back door to the resonators plugin was closed and slammed shut, and this upset somewhat. I created an electroacoustic blackboard that uses the resonators plugin, perhaps not quite as it's expected to be used, and now that's all broken. So I think that it's nice when you're thinking about updates to not only think about your own kind of solutions in terms of push, but think about that kind of dev community and people that are maybe creating bespoke solutions. Because I don't expect people, I think, to create something for someone that's got a 1 in 10 million condition. Like, no one is going to do that. I've got to find my own way around it. And I think Ableton empowers you to do that. I think it's nice to think about keeping the back door open where possible.
I guess that all ties into flexibility and adaptability. So maybe Tim, you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that it's a really common experience in that often people are hacking things and finding solutions because the standard interfaces and the standard things don't accommodate what they need, and so they have to find an alternative solution, which means that they're using the back end, or they're using a little kind of little quirky thing about software, and it happens all the time that those things get taken away. And so, the more open these things can be and the more consistently they can be made available, for that application that you perhaps as a developer would never think of in advance, and no one's expecting you to, but so, people are using those things and they depend upon it. And I've come across people who've ended up with 10-year-old computers that they're forced to keep using because there's some operating system update plus some software update plus some hardware update that means if they don't, their entire practice or workflow in whatever they're working in is just impossible. And so what happens is it really can freeze people in really old tech, really difficult scenarios, and just destroy what people have developed.
I guess some of that from a developer end is just being in contact with your user community and being open to hearing how people are using your products in maybe innovative ways or ways that you weren't perhaps expecting, and valuing that feedback. I guess there's another side to this, which is when you've deliberately developed for a specific accessibility feature, always remembering to check that doesn't break when you do a new update for something, because that can also happen.
Yeah, I would just say also on this subject, I talked about the robo recorder being a cyborg instrument, but I would go further and I would say, particularly as the disabled person, that, I am a cyborg performer. The software and the hardware is so integral to both my creative process. When I'm writing a story or a piece, then the technology and the creation of that setup is integral to that process. So the whole thing is a cyborg creation. So whenever we're using software, that is changing our brain, and it's a mutual process, isn't it? When I've got a setup and I'm working with it, that is really part of me. And then if that changes, it's like learning to walk again. So it might sound a bit extreme, but it really does feel like that because it's really integral to your performance practice. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I understand.
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
Yeah,
because I've also been forced not to update my operating system because I was scared I might lose some of the accessibility features. So when you do update sometimes, and when you lose those features, you you tend to find another way around it, but it's usually not the same because every feature, every accessibility feature has its role in my creative approach. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
That's okay. You're doing great, Mxshi.
It's still surreal that I'm here. But basically...
Should I just say, so Mxshi has come over from South Africa for this conference. So yeah, amazing. You must be slightly jet lagged, but thank you so much. So this does kind of link in with our next topic as well, which is all around documentation and communicating what you have done and how your products can be used. So Mxshi, I was wondering if you could talk about that process you spoke about earlier of wanting to get into music technology, but having to take that leap of faith and just try so many different products. Because I guess at that point in time, although Ableton is in a much, much better place now in terms of documenting accessibility, maybe back then there wasn't so much information available. And I guess when you're going on your quest to find technology that you could work with, how was that process and how might that be different these days?
I mean, back then, there wasn't much of information online with regards to accessibility. So I had to read a lot of manuals, a lot of magazines, because YouTube didn't really exist when I started. I think when I started, Ableton was still on version 7. And then, yeah, so basically, I read a lot of magazines that at the time were covering technology. I think the most famous one at the time was Computer Music and Music Tech, which came with a CD, a DVD inside with with some tutorials and samples. That was just before Splice became a sample-based company. There used to be, I remember when there used to be a file sharing company, like Dropbox. So it's been an amazing journey to be quite honest. But I definitely felt like I was researching more than creating. Yeah.
And I think that's probably quite a common theme for a lot of people. So I think the more that you can communicate, I guess, through your own websites, what is and maybe what isn't so accessible, people always appreciate that honesty. But it's also allowing that information to flow through to product pages, for example, so that when people are looking at retail, there's information about accessibility. And it's also customer support. So if someone rings up or emails in and says, we need support with this accessibility thing, making sure that the staff that deal with those inquiries know what accessibility is and what features your products has. Tim, did you want to add anything to that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that it's something that I find eternally frustrating because there is actually tons of really good stuff going on out there and loads of things that are accessible, but it's really incredibly hard for people to find out that information and to be able to use it. Really very, very hard indeed. And, you know, if the odd person is tenacious enough and is determined enough to do it, but, you know, if you're a beginner or, you know, perhaps you're not a musician or you know, you're a parent looking for something for your kid, you're not a musician and you're not a technologist, actually, it's pretty much a brick wall. How do you do it? How do you start? How do you get there? It's really very, very hard. And to solve that issue actually is going to take collective effort from everybody in this room and all of the people who are involved in this, because it's about the products and it's about it's also about the tweaks and it's about all of the other things and the bespoke stuff that needs to happen. And so, but you know, I think it's that person that's brand new and isn't yet a musician and isn't yet a technologist. They're the thousands out there who aren't currently able to make music. And they can't even begin. And so it's those people that we need to make sure absolutely have that really straightforward information that means they can get started. Because once they're started, then the path is there. And it really is. Things are really improving rapidly. But that barrier is just so hard to overcome at the moment, and that's the thing that really needs to change, I think.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think just speaking as someone who was a professionally trained classical musician coming into music technology, and I didn't have the faintest clue what MIDI was. You know, I never used a microphone. And even for someone who's a professional musician, actually to understand how MIDI works and what to do with it is quite difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's not obvious, you know? I don't know, does it seem obvious to anyone here who's been working with it for a long time? I don't know if that's how we would set it up now. I mean, the fact is it is the standard, and one of the things we discussed was it's so important everything's MIDI mappable, because that's how we're controlling everything, right? Regardless of what interface you use, whether it's a wireless interface, hands-free, whether it's a tactile interface, it's really important everything's MIDI mappable. But just to understand MIDI actually is pretty tough, and how that integrates into different software products, because it's so variable, actually. And even now, although I use MIDI constantly, it can still be tricky to understand how to integrate my setup, say, into different software products. You know, it requires a little bit of reading. And I wonder if there's a piece of work around how do we make that more accessible for people. I think in Glover, they've got actually software with the Mimu gloves. I think they've got some quite good demos of how to map things within that software, and which is a really good example of, I think, making that process more accessible.
I guess there's that side of it, which is giving people the skills to do the hard work themselves. But there's also, as developers, making it really simple so you don't need to do that hard work. So I guess we'll see the demo with Native Instruments later, and how the control keyboards auto map stuff, and that kind of thing is unbelievably helpful. But I guess what we need is more of that across the industry, and for that kind of cross-compatibility between products. And I think you should see more and more of that with MIDI 2 and the bidirectional communication and the automatic configuration and all these things. But yeah, I think, Mxshi, you had a point around, the integration between hardware and software, and perhaps using AI to help with that process.
Yes, Jay, like I said earlier on yesterday, I'm going to be careful when I say AI, because automatically people think Suno. So basically, I think AI would definitely help in terms of creating smarter devices, smarter musical instrument, if you will, because we already have smart glasses, smartphones, but there's not a smart instrument. So I believe that if we could have an AI designed from the ground up for visually impaired artists or other disabled artists as well, that once we get into music production, it will be very helpful. And also, if we incorporate things like ARM, I'm not a software engineer or anything like that, but my understanding is that if we incorporate ARM, then it will allow the instrument themselves to have a brain, so that they can communicate with the computer. Because in the long run, like, most musicians do lose their sight, especially if you're working on a computer. Not as in like you become blind, but you do end up wearing spectacles. Like most engineers that I idolize, they're all wearing spectacles, from Tony Maserati to Andrew Sheps. They all wear glasses. So, which means that working on a computer for too long has an impact. So if we can find a way for devices to be sort of their own thing and not rely on a screen per se, then we'll be on the right path.
Absolutely. And like I say, we'll hear from Native Instruments later, and perhaps they can give a little bit of insight into how that all works and how that config just happens. You plug it in and it works. So we're starting to run out of time in this particular slot. We've got about 10 minutes left. Obviously, we've got some more time for Q&A at the end of the session for general conversations. I hope everyone is kind of capturing questions in their mind at the moment that we can come back to later. What I wanted to do now is talk about some potential developments that are on the horizon, and I'm going to hand over to probably Tim primarily to talk about the work of Drake Music. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so Yeah, I mean, I think that these structural issues, as far as we can see, are really the central one. There's just so much great work that never makes it out to the people who need it, and so we are attempting to address that problem, at least as far as we can from our perspective, by developing. Do I need to be louder?
Still for the other room.
Oh, okay, all right, I'll just talk loud. So we're developing a project, it's a long-term project for us called the Accessible Musical Instrument Collection. So at the moment, if you need accessible instruments or accessible tech, there is literally nowhere in the world where you can go to try the stuff. That resource doesn't exist, which obviously is an enormous barrier because, you know, stuff is expensive. People can't speculatively buy 5 different bits of hardware just in, you know, to figure out the one that works. They can't, you know, people can't afford that. And so our plan is to ultimately have a building full of everything that we can get our hands on, from the commercial hardware and software down to bespoke things. Lots of instruments get developed in academia. People spend 4 years full-time building an amazing instrument for their PhD. They finish their PhD, it goes in a cupboard, and nobody ever sees it ever again. It's a tragedy, really. We see this kind of thing happening all the time, and just amazing work doesn't get out there. And, you know, even where there are accessibility features, often there's a chain of things that need to work, and it's not obvious necessarily how that happens. And so, yeah, our plan is to build this resource, put it as online as we can possibly make it, so it's available everywhere where people are prepared to share their source code and IP, open source their project. We will also host those things, put it out there, and ideally have our own instrument development program so that when somebody comes along and doesn't find a thing that they want, we can make it for them or hack something that does. So ultimately, you know, we want that resource to be as comprehensive and as complete as it can possibly be. Obviously, you know, that's a dream. The reality is that we probably won't be able to achieve completely that. But all of the bits of kit and bits of software that are getting developed by everybody here should be there. They should have accessibility features. We want to include them. And most importantly, one of the biggest challenges for us is going to be documenting this stuff and making sure that the information is available. Like it's one thing having the kit and sort of knowing how to use it. It's another thing really understanding, knowing, and being able to share with people how to use it successfully in various different contexts. So that's what we're doing from our perspective to try and really address these structural issues. You know, these kinds of things that, you know, we can't do it on our own, and it will need the support of everybody in the community to kind of do it and to support that work as much as possible. But it's the opportunity really is there to get the people who need it the stuff that they need. And so it's, you know, it's absolutely vital that this happens, and this is what we're trying to do. But I think it really is ultimately a collective effort to make that happen. And so, you know, we're kind of inviting collaborations, and you know, anybody who's interested, come and talk to me, and we'll, you know, find ways to you know, do a joint effort, I suppose. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got just a couple of minutes left. Have we got any closing thoughts just for this section? Obviously, there's more opportunity later to do Q&A stuff, but anything that you guys were hoping to share in this slot?
I think one thing that maybe hasn't come up so far is the value of presets. And something that we were discussing is that often we're creating custom complex setups, and actually it's extremely valuable for us to have the option to be able to save that easily. And a lot of doors and, you know, that's not an option. Something that Max does really well. And I think that is something that will be very, very useful for anybody to have. So that was one kind of wish list item. And I think secondly, it's just that everyone in this room, you know, can make such a difference, and already does, because it's such a miracle, really, what we can do with technology now, and freed me, you know, to make music again. And I'm very grateful for all of your hard work, and anything you can do in this area will make such an incredible difference to people.
Absolutely, totally agree. So we're going to switch tracks slightly now. So I'm going to welcome Tim Burgess to the stage in just a second. So it probably makes sense if you guys make some space and maybe sit there, because I'll call you back up for the Q&A. But yeah, if we could have Tim Burgess on stage, please. And just while Tim is coming up, I'm going to talk briefly about a new survey that we're launching at Sound Without Sight today. I think we're very, very lucky at Sound Without Sight. We've been approached by a few different software companies recently asking if we can connect developers with users from our community. We're very proud to have about 700 people now as members of Sound Without Sight, many of whom will have like valuable lived experience of using music hardware and software. But we've not really had a formal way of making that connection. So basically, we're launching a new survey today to hear from both sides. We want to try and create a product or a platform that can provide that service or effectively and genuinely usefully connect companies with lived experience. So just a quick look at not the emails. So just a very, very simple survey, basically. Asks whether you are a developer, a user of the products, or both, and asks how we could be of most service at making that a really useful connection. So we'd love to get some responses on there. So the survey is at soundwithoutsight.org, and then get involved and access through collaboration. Hello, Tim.
Hello, James.
How are you doing?
Terrified, but we'll go for it.
So, Tim, the first thing that I wanted to do was a little introduction, if that's okay, so that people know a bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay. My name's Tim Burgess. I'm an IT consultant specialising in accessibility, particularly for visually impaired people, but I try to be as broad as I can, particularly relating to music and music technology and music education. I used to be a very bad musician in the 80s. Things haven't got any better. In fact, I've got considerably worse, but there you go. I lost my vision in my mid-20s, sold all my gear because I didn't think I could work it anymore at a professional level. I was sort of semi-pro at the time. Did a bit of social work, ended up doing a degree in computer science, and then worked for a number of accessibility-related companies, plus a stint doing tech support for Microsoft. It was very interesting supporting Windows 95 on a launch day with no screen reader, because they didn't exist. In 2006, I run a company called Raised Bar, doing this kind of work that Jay and everybody else here is trying to support. I've done work for A Return and NRA and others, and I'm being careful about my NDAs.
And just to go over, I guess, the aim for this session, Tim. So I guess what we're trying to do is take out the fear of trying to develop for accessibility in the first instance. Like, it can be an overwhelming topic, and what we're trying to do is just to give you that introduction and what the different things are that you need to know about, because I feel like maybe we skipped that part last year.
Yeah, there's some very simple things that you can do to enhance the accessibility of your product. I think maybe the fear is that you're going to make a big commitment to lots of code and complicated stuff, whereas maybe a better model would be to start with the basics in your version 1 or version 2, roll it out over time. There used to be a very accessible DAW called Sonar. The product manager at the time I dealt with it was a guy called Alex Wedner. And I was doing this kind of presentation at the Royal College of Music many years ago. Alex couldn't make the talk, but he gave me a quote that he said I could use. When I asked him how much it cost Cakewalk, as it was then, to develop accessibility, he said it was so low he couldn't measure it because they'd done it bit at a time.
Cool. So just a couple of definitions to get us going on the session. So screen reader support, we've mentioned it a couple of times already, but what does that mean? So a screen reader is assistive software that describes elements on the screen through either speech or braille. I guess an important point is that it can only describe one element at a time, and that's something that gets overlooked sometimes. So as developers, you have to think about how you would present your lovely two-dimensional user interface as a sequential list of components, effectively. And keyboard navigation does what it says on the tin, really, but just to expand on that slightly, generally people are using tab to get through the interface, sometimes in conjunction with arrow keys, depending on the screen reader. People always really appreciate when there's shortcuts to jump to useful areas within the UI as well, so you're not tabbing a million times to get to a particular thing. And also when there are key commands to perform actions directly, so everyone's done Control-S to save, for example. So keyboard navigation helps everyone, as does screen reader support. And these two things are separate, but most often used at the same time. So just to tie that together in a fairly simple plugin interface, we've had a video submitted by George Limpus from SSL.
Accessibility support with SSL plugins. Using VoiceOver or Narrator, plugin parameters are selectable with keyboard presses. Here it is in action with SSL 4KG. Let's start by applying a high-pass filter.
On filters in button. Out kilohertz low pass filter slider. 12 dB per octave high pass HP filter. Use this to remove low frequency content from the signal.
So in this instance, we've been told what type of filter we're using. We've been given an overview of how it might be used. And now we can go ahead and dial in some values.
In slider. 13.4 Hz. 16.8 Hz. 20.2 Hz. 23.6 Hz. Out of slider.
Here are some more examples of narration with EQ parameters.
0.0 decibels HMF gain slider. 3.00 kHz HMF frequency slider. 1.50 HMFQ slider.
The current value is read out at the highlighted parameter, followed by the control type. Then we are told if the highlighted section is a button or a slider, as this of course affects how you interact with it. The readout is also viewable via the VoiceOver caption panel.
Compressor mix slider. Blends between the processed and unprocessed compressed signal. Use this to apply parallel compression. In slider. 99.0%, 94.0%. Out of slider.
Thank you for watching this brief overview of accessibility support with SSL plugins. Most of our plugins either already have or will have accessibility support over the coming months.
So yeah, a fairly leisurely demo there of navigating an interface using a screen reader and keyboard navigation. So Tim, the first topic we were going to talk about was designing for accessibility. So you've mentioned one of the points here as well about accessibility being much cheaper and easier when it's considered from the start of development. And you've also talked about involving community members during that process. But why do you think it is that blind users are integral to inclusive design?
Well, okay, you could say that I'm going to promote use of blind people as a disability model as self-serving, which is absolutely true. But we're also a good model because if you solve accessibility problems for us, you've gone a long way to supporting lots of other disability groups as well. So in that demo that we've just seen, the demonstrator didn't talk about a key feature that I like to focus in on, which is focus. You may not bother about focus in your designs, but it really helps screen readers. If you set focus on controls as you move around them using keyboard navigation or your mouse, then the screen reader immediately knows what control it should be looking at and trying to interpret. It's a classic mistake that if, let's say, you dismiss a dialogue, but you don't then set focus on the item that you really should be after that dialogue's been dismissed, the screen reader will do its best to figure out what it should be looking at, but it's going to use heuristics that don't always work. If you specifically set focus, the screen reader says, okay, I'm good. This is what I need to figure out. This is true of almost all accessibility clients. So if you get it right for a screen reader, you'll get it right for a magnifier, you'll get it right for switch gear that people with motor disabilities use. So yeah, and we're easy to test for. If you turn off your monitor and hide your mouse, and then you can use your product, you figured it out. What more do you need? So yeah, you don't need complicated gear to get to an alpha. You can be your own tester by making yourself blind.
It's a point that seems obvious maybe to you and I, Tim, but I think well-designed keyboard navigation, that really helps everyone. That's probably the quickest way of accessing many interfaces for any user, but especially users with potentially physical disabilities who might be using keyboard macros to limit the amount of movements that they are making with the keyboard and the mouse. I think really a mouse is quite an inefficient way of anyone accessing pretty much any interface.
Yeah. First thing, if you're in a dialogue, make sure you can tab around it just using the tab key. Also test that you can shift tab backwards in the same order. Believe it or not, I've seen dialogue boxes that have a different tab order going forward as they do going backwards, which is really confusing, to put it mildly. I won't mention any names.
So we've got three kind of themes on the screen, Tim. So, so we currently have focus, tab order, and keystrokes, and you kind of have to consider all of them in conjunction. You can't really do one without the others.
Yeah, I think the ideal is that you should be able to get to every control in your interface with either tab or, if not appropriate, a keyboard combination. As I've said, this is great for multiple disability groups, and your power users who don't have any disabilities will love you anyway because it allows them to move faster without a mouse.
Absolutely. And I guess in terms of focus and tab order, as a programmer, how would you set those things or have control over those things?
Most languages have a call such as set focus, believe it or not, or set focus and passing a window handle to indicate the control that you want to obtain focus. The tab order, some languages, C# has a tab index property for each control that you can set after the fact. Most languages, more typically, the tab order is set by the order in which you construct those controls when you create your window. So you've got to be a little bit careful there that maybe in version 2 you introduce some new widgets, and as programmers we normally just bang them onto the end of the constructor. But that can really mess up the tab order, so you need to check it afterwards.
And that would be physically just moving blocks of code.
Yeah, just moving the code for the new elements that you're creating.
Cool. I mean, that seems simple to me. I'm not a programmer.
It is simple, yeah, but it's dead easy to forget.
Cool. So one thing we've not really picked up on, and we will go into this in more detail later, but I guess the topic of glanceability, as someone who is blind or low vision, if you're using a screen reader, if you're using a magnifier, you're often focusing on one part of the screen at a time. I think sighted producers will have all these things that you just look at and intuitively make decisions from. So like the tempo or the peak level on the meters, these kinds of things. So it's great to be able to give people the option to query for those values, so they don't need to kind of refocus on a specific element just to get that information. So we'll pick up on that later.
Yeah, there's a good example that affects everybody who uses a DAW. Let's say you've got a couple of hundred tracks, which is not unusual these days. How are you going to tell which are soloed? That, I would say, is a glanceability problem. And I think it's a glanceability problem for everybody. If you solve that for everybody, you solve it for us. So, But as Jay's just said, we have it in spades. So how do we glance at the current tempo? How do we glance at the current start and end of a time selection? This is something that tends to get overlooked. I think a good example of how to get around it would be actions in Reaper.
So we've got a demo on that later, actually.
Oh, cool, okay. I'm not exactly a Reaper fanboy, but a lot of people use it. And it's one of its strengths that you can call on a custom action to read you really whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. So we did a little demo earlier. So SSL, we navigated through a plugin. So Tim, you and I recorded a quick demo of the main parts of Ableton Live as well. So I'm just going to play that now.
Okay.
Live. Untitled. Window. In track 1 MIDI. Scene 1. Slot. Has keyboard focus. Clip slot. Each session view slot can hold one clip to be played live.
You hear it say that you've got keyboard focus, which is nice. Okay, so moving left and right, move me between tracks.
In track 2 MIDI. In track 3 audio. Scene 1. Slot. Clips.
And up and down move me through the sessions within the track.
In track 3 audio. In track 3 audio. In track 3 audio. Scene 1.
Now, there are some things that we can't tap to, but we have keystrokes that will take us there. So if I do option 0,
link, unticked, checkbox.
it'll take me to the
Link.
control view.
Use the toggle to turn link on or off. When enabled, the button displays the number of connected link-enabled devices.
You can hear that it tells you what the control is, what its value is, and what I can do about it.
Ticked, link, checkbox.
And we talked about tab order.
Tap button. Tap 120.00. Tempo. Phase nudge down. Phase nudge 4. Time signature numerator 4. Time signature denominator metronome.
So we can tab all the way through this view.
Metronome 1. Lead 1. Arrangement.
See how responsive it is.
1. Play. Stop. But leaving playback. Entering record and capture. MIDI or automation. Re-enable or capture MIDI.
I'm happy, so I'll go back to session view.
In track 3 audio. Scene 1. Slot. Clip slot. Each session view slot can hold one clip to be played.
But you see, we've moved from one view to the other and the focus have moved appropriately.
Leaving in track 3 audio. Scene 1. Entering 3 audio mixer panel group. Clips.
Now I can tab through the mixer.
Text. In. Input type. Pop-up button. 1. Input channel. Pop-up button.
But the thing to take away is that we're only hearing the thing that we're currently on.
Cool. So it probably makes sense just to, before we move on, so that demo, you prefer to have your speech reading out a lot of stuff at the kind of default rate, but other people will use screen readers differently.
Yeah, I got into the habit of using defaults because I used to use I used to do a lot of demos, and most sighted folk can't cope with high speech rates. So my ability to listen to high speech rates degraded over time. Also, you heard there that a lot of controls were announcing an awful lot of additional information. That's a setting within the screen reader that you can turn on or off. So as you become more proficient, you can reduce the amount of speech down to what you really need instead of all the extra guff that you need while you're trying to learn.
Cool, just thought it was useful to highlight that. So the next session, so we're diving into how to do accessibility a bit more. And the first topic is how, or the fact that you should use operating system native controls where possible.
Yeah, you can save yourself a lot of pain if you're able to use native controls. So a Windows or a Mac default button, or if you want a slight difference, derive from that control. And most of those controls, I emphasize most, have accessibility built in. So you don't need to do anything. As long as you label the thing, it should work out of the box with a screen reader, with a magnifier, with any other accessibility client software.
What about if it doesn't work?
If it doesn't work, then things get a little bit more tricky. If you're using a framework like Juice or Qt or WX widgets, although I don't know of any music software that uses WX widgets, you can then customize further because they have some inherent accessibility support that allows you to easily add additional information to your control to maybe give it an accessibility label that be read out by a screen reader, but maybe not visible on screen. You can maybe assign it an accessibility role. So something that looks like a button but isn't a button, you may be able to sort of convince it that it's a button by giving it an accessibility role and get out of jail fairly free.
And is this using the operating system's accessibility APIs? Or is that the next step?
That's your next step if all of that fails. So Apple and Microsoft both have their accessibility protocols. Apple is NS Accessibility. Microsoft is part of their UIA set of protocols as UIA Accessibility. They're quite different, but they are both a lot better documented than they were when they were first introduced. We certainly don't have time to dig into those today, but again, if you derive from some of their base classes, as well as the other classes you might be using to construct your control, you might be surprised as to how little work you have to do to make your custom control accessible. And I'm conscious that using native controls is all well and good, but if you're writing commercial software and you have a particular brand of controls that you want to perpetuate across your product set, then using native controls isn't always an option.
So you spoke briefly there about the different frameworks that might be able to give you a helping hand. One of those was Juice, and if you want to learn more specifically about accessibility in Juice, I would definitely recommend checking out Harry Morley's talk from ADC 2023, which, he delved into building an accessible Juice app and what that means, and it's a really, really good overview of getting started with accessibility, specifically in Juice. You mentioned Qt and WX widgets as offering that helping hand as well. And one more point is that with web-based UIs, you might get a lot of accessibility stuff done for free without a whole lot of extra work. And that's something that Sam is going to talk about a little bit more later.
You beat me to it there.
Sorry, Tim, talking over you there.
Okay.
So this is where I get to embarrass you slightly.
Oh.
So we've got a video contributed by Ifta, who I know you've done some work with recently, and he's talking about accessibility within Macs for Live devices.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Iftach, and I make accessible audio software. Some of my recent releases are Fluffs and Pitch Pipe. Fluffs is a state-of-the-art Macs for Live loudness meter and stereo phase scope with real-time and offline analysis, batch operations, and multi-channel support. Pitch Pipe is a versatile and accurate tuner. It can analyze complex signals and features a dedicated string mode with presets for various string instruments, allowing for quick and precise tuning. Both devices integrate seamlessly with popular screen readers like VoiceOver and NVDA, making them compatible with braille displays and other assistive technologies. Every single feature is accessible via dedicated keyboard shortcuts or tabbing. Additionally, they come with 11 color themes, including options designed for color blindness and low vision. None of these devices would have been possible without the guidance and advice of Tim Burgess, which really helped me understand how to do accessibility right. Perhaps the biggest takeaway Tim shared with me was to integrate with existing accessibility frameworks instead of writing custom ones, and to ensure a consistent user experience. This inspired me to develop a set of accessibility-centric externals for Macs MSP named Maxes. These objects can send notifications to screen readers, read global keystrokes, and more. They're available for free and aim to help other developers make their devices accessible too.
Awesome stuff. So if you're creating devices in Max for Live, then definitely check out those externals, which allow you to link into the accessibility frameworks that we were just talking about.
Just to put it in context, the first time I talked to Ifta, he was making his plugins generate their own speech. I pointed him to UI accessibility and NS accessibility, thinking that'll keep him busy for a little while. And the following day, he sent me a prototype for both that worked. So it can't be that bad, can it?
Cool. So helpful developer tools for accessibility. We've got options for Windows and Mac. So things that might point you in the right direction for some common issues like unlabeled controls.
Yeah, Microsoft have their Accessibility Insights application, which replaced a thing called Microsoft Test, which was embarrassingly inaccessible if you're a blind developer. Microsoft Insights is very good. It will show you what you haven't labeled, what controls might not be accessible. It's free, just download it, try it on your code and see what it tells you. It could save you a lot of time. If you're on the Mac and you develop in Xcode, that has an accessibility checker built in, which does pretty much the same thing. It will look through your UI and say, well, you've got this object here. I can't get to it. I don't know what it is. Please do something about it. So at least it'll give you a checklist of where you're falling down. It may also identify objects that really don't matter, so you can choose to ignore them, but at least you'll do that from a point of good information.
So just a word on testing, really. I guess how would you recommend developers testing on their own and also with others, Tim?
Well, I've already mentioned the idea of put that mouse away and turn your display off, which gives you no excuse not to test even before you get to alpha. Previous speakers have talked about the importance of getting people involved as soon as possible in your cycle, both in terms of getting a good idea of what people want, but also that they are testing early in your process to find those things that maybe you missed. I can't emphasise how important that is. We don't have a speaker from Ableton today, but I was involved in that project, making Live 12 accessible, and they put an awful lot of effort into listening to all kinds of users with all kinds of accessibility requirements, and you can see from the quality of the result how well that paid off.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tim. So I guess the bulk of what we've been talking about there is the base level of accessibility, making sure that your UI can be navigated using the screen reader and the keyboard. I think it's also very important to think about usability and workflow optimization. And we touched on this earlier with shortcuts and querying for certain information. So we've got a presentation now from Scott Chesworth, who details how this is all handled within Reaper with the support of the open source community.
Hello, I'm Scott Chesworth. I'm one of the people that contributes code to ASARA, which stands for Open Source Accessibility for the Reaper application. We ship on Windows and Mac, we're free, and we try really hard to make Reaper as accessible as we can with screen reader software on both those platforms, supporting VoiceOver on Mac and a bunch of screen readers on Windows. I'm a full-time screen reader user myself. I'm totally blind, couldn't find a camera in the house. So you're just going to be seeing a screen capture today. And honestly, there's probably not going to be that much to look at visually. Really, what I'm here for is to show you some ways that ASARA provides speech feedback, tries to make it as productive as we can. And I'm going to touch on some ways that we let users customize it to their needs as well. So first things first, let's make the robot accomplice visible for anyone that's reading along.
Speech viewer enabled.
And I'm here in Reaper with
no tracks.
No tracks. So I'm going to paste in some stems just so we got something to listen to.
Insert multiple media items dialog. Same time position on separate tracks radio button checked.
And this is a natively accessible dialog on Windows and Mac. Asara doesn't need to do anything here. I can read these radio buttons, for example.
Sequential time positions on a single track radio button checked.
But the one that I wanted was already selected, so...
Same time position, 6 tracks, 6 items added.
Now that last part, 6 tracks, 6 item added. That's where Asara stepped in and told me what happened. And the same will be true when I start moving through tracks. We're using Reaper actions to move to previous and next track, but Asara is providing the feedback. So it's going to tell me things like track number, track name.
2 drum stem, 1 item.
How many items are on the track. I'm going to go down to a track that mentions being an instrumental and delete it because I don't need that.
3 leads and extras, 4 protocol inst v1 item.
And delete.
1 track removed.
And that's Asara again telling me what was deleted when I hit the delete action. We make that context sensitive. Now if I hit play in this project...
Play.
It's going to be kind of loud if you need to hear the screen reader over it. So just for the presentation, I'm going to turn the volume of all these tracks down. And you'll notice I'm not going to open the mixer window. I don't need to. One of the things that Asara does is we provide a key map that puts tons of keystrokes right under users' fingers so they can stay in the arrange view where we are now and still have control over track volume, pan, arm, solo, mute, all that good stuff that you might typically go for the mixer for. I'm going to select all the tracks.
5 tracks selected.
And just move the volume down.
Track minus 18.
Somewhere there.
Play. Stop.
Yeah, that'll be fine. Every screen reader treats having multiple windows on screen at the same time and moving between them a little bit differently. And so for our users, it makes most sense, productivity-wise, to spend as much time in one window as they can. So you just heard that Asara will provide speech feedback as I move to or select things, but there's some stuff I need to know even quicker than that. Just as a sighted person would glance along the top of the timeline to see their position in bars and beats, or look along the bottom of the timeline for their position in minutes and seconds, Asara provides a keystroke that I can press once to hear primary format, what's along the top.
Bar 69 beat 10%, stopped.
Or I can press it twice to hear secondary, what's along the bottom.
Bar 2 minutes 0.000 seconds, stopped.
And we respect Reaper's settings for primary and secondary. So if I just do a little bit of editing magic and change my secondary to hours, minutes, seconds and frames, now I can press that keystroke twice.
Bar 0 hours 2 minutes and 0 seconds 0 frames, stopped.
And it's a different keystroke, but we can get that same style of feedback for the length of the project as well without needing to move anywhere. 1 press.
179 bars 1 beat 37%.
2 presses for my secondary format.
0 hours 5 minutes and 16 seconds 8 frames.
Sometimes it's a single press to report something, like tell us the status of it, and a double press to change. For example, I can hit once to hear my tempo and time sig.
102, 6/8.
And if I wanted to change that with a tempo marker, double press.
1 tempo/time signature marker dialog BPM. Edit selected 102.
And this is a natively accessible dialog. Asara doesn't need to do anything in here. I need to close it because I don't want to do that.
Unsaved prod.
Now let's have a listen to an example where we need to tell users about tracks being soloed, but we need to do it in 2 different ways depending on when they've asked for that information. I'm going to select the bottom 3 tracks in this project.
5 4 3 select.
And I'm going to solo them.
3 tracks soloed.
So Asara tells me there that 3 tracks were soloed. That's useful information. But now imagine that I'm in a project that's got like, I don't know, 100 tracks. If we were to request which tracks are soloed and Asara was just to tell you, well, there's 3 of them. Good luck finding those. You've got to scroll all the way through your track list to figure out which ones they are. And so in that situation...
Soloed, 3 leads and extra stem through 5 vocal stem.
We say 3 through 5 with track names, and that tells you everything in between is also soloed. So as you've heard, Asara provides quite a lot of feedback by default. And what we've found from user feedback is that as they get more confident, they want to start turning that stuff off if they don't need to hear it constantly. For example, if I play the project,
play.
Asara says play, and if I start skipping through bar by bar, telling me where I am,
stop.
It tells me I've stopped as well. But in this particular project, I'd rather hear the audio than hear bar, 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 bar. And I probably don't need to be told that the transport's played and stopped either. So we're going to go into the Asara configuration dialog.
Asara configuration dialog.
And in here,
report time movement during playback/recording checkbox checked.
I'm going to turn off report time movement during playback and recording.
Not checked.
And there's keyboard accelerators too for everything, so I can just jump straight to
report transport state, play, record, etc. Checkbox not checked all plus
uncheck that. And
unsafe.
Now let's repeat the same scenario. Well, the project's playing, but it didn't tell me, and I can skip around. And I'm just hearing the audio rather than hearing the screen reader jabbering over what I'm trying to listen to. That's the way I like it in projects like this. It's not the way that everybody likes it. So in that Asara configuration dialog, we provide plenty of customization for users to choose what they want to hear and when they want to hear it. Well, that's all from me today. If anybody's got questions, I'll be at the Accessibility Meetup on Wednesday. If you want to poke around Asara, read more about it, maybe try it out, go to asara.reaperaccessibility.com. We develop on GitHub, so if you search Asara on GitHub, you can find the source code. Everything is open source. Have a poke around. Feel free to get in touch. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Scott, if you're listening. I hope you are. So we've got one very quick example now from Byron Harden. So Byron is a Pro Tools user and a technology trainer. He's a producer. He does many different things, but he uses Pro Tools with the open source Flow Tools, which is an accessibility workflow enhancement add-on for Pro Tools. And this is what Byron thinks about it.
As you were saying, like what Tim is talking about, how the focus is when you're just looking at one thing. Flow Tools is a workflow enhancement platform that mainly assists with the nature of querying. Blind person wants to look at time, right, on the timeline. They want to look at just any kind of information. How many tracks are in record mode? What's solo? How many tracks are selected? Any of those things that intuitively a sighted person could just look at that UI and say, oh, okay, here it is. You know, and decisions are made around that information. Flow Tools kind of gives you a better peripheral view of what's happening as far as the configuration of that screen.
Cool. So I guess interesting, Tim, that a lot of that work there is happening in the community. So we're going off piste here a little bit. I guess there's positives either way of having that work done by the community or having it kind of officially adopted by the companies behind the software. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think things like Flow Tools and Asara, I mean, shout out to all the people that contribute to those projects because they're amazing. Their vulnerability is the small number of people involved. We only need, one bug crash, being horrible about it, and we're starting from scratch again. So it would be great to have these features built in by the manufacturers of the product, rather than people like Scott spending their time writing bolt-ons instead of making music. And Scott is a damn good musician. Shout out to those guys because they're amazing. But it'd be nice if you didn't have to do that. But we talked about glanceability earlier. It is probably the trickiest thing to get right. If you're developing a web interface, and I know that Sam will be talking more about this, a thing like an ARIA live region can help. Because you can just send it text and that will get automatically announced. Tied to a keystroke and you've got your glanceability solved. But for more traditional desktop applications, it's a bit of a trickier act. As Scott pointed out, Reaper has custom actions that you can exploit. Not all products do. If you're developing a new product, maybe it's something to think about because it also extends the functionality for all of your customers, not just the disability group.
Absolutely. And I guess the flip side of that conversation is like the open source community is an amazing way to dip your toe into this world, especially as I alluded to at the start of the session. There's not like a ton of people who are working in the audio industry who are blind actually developing stuff, and it's a really good pathway to, I guess, get involved in the first instance and get a way in. There's arguments either way. So just to summarize what we've covered in this session, because we're coming up to the end. So screen reader support and keyboard navigation are essential for blind users, but they also result in more accessible interfaces for all users. You should use native operating system controls where possible, and operating system accessibility APIs when needed, or you could also consider using a web-based UI. You should consider how users could navigate your interface sequentially, but also optimize usability through keyboard shortcuts and commands. And do your best to support glanceability by allowing users to query for essential information and also providing speech feedback for dynamic visual content. So this might be things like clipping lights on meters, for example, to just pipe that through to the screen reader as and when it's relevant and give the user the option of whether they want that or not. So that does bring us to the end of our talk, Tim. Was there anything that you were hoping to cover that we haven't had time to?
Yeah, I think there's one point I'd make that maybe a definition of accessibility. I've seen lots of interfaces over the years that are accessible. If you've got 5 times the amount of time that your non-disabled colleague has got, that is not accessibility in my book. I view accessibility as your interface working quickly enough with accessibility clients that the user can hold down a job doing that thing. So if you're a mix engineer, you'll want to mix at the same rate as somebody who's sighted or somebody who has full use of their hands. If you're a composer, maybe you want to do TV and film work where you're under a lot of time pressure, so taking 4 or 5 times as long is not acceptable. So I think workflow and productivity is part of your testing if you're really serious about testing for accessibility.
Hear, hear. Yeah, totally agree. So we've got just over 10 minutes now until the break. So I was wondering if we could welcome back Tim and Liza and Mxshi onto the stage. And we've got a little opportunity now to do some quick reflections and Q&A about things that have happened so far, if people are interested in doing so. We should have a radio mic, and we should also have a volunteer who can see hands up, because I can't.
Hi, thank you very much. I would like to ask about the vocabulary in, because I see all of these descriptions or options that you can choose, but there is probably a type of vocabulary that helps be concise and clear, because I can imagine if everyone just tries their own that it becomes convoluted really quickly.
Yes, I guess we're talking about screen reader access there and providing that speech feedback.
Yes.
And what are the kind of standard terms and the order for providing that information? So Tim, that's probably one for you.
Yeah, it's not completely consistent. If you want to be consistent within an OS, I'd refer you to the operating system manufacturer's own documentation. So if you're implementing using UI accessibility, use their set of terms. If you're on Mac, look at NS accessibility and their terminology. Most of the time, it'll work out to being the same thing. But occasionally you'll get a tweak. So the Mac might call a slider, and Windows might call it a scroll control or vice versa. I don't think it's something you need to worry overly about. If you're following the docs, you'll be good.
I guess there's another thing there, which is tooltips. So when you have your verbosity on the screen reader set to high, some applications will give you a description, a long description of what the control is doing, for example.
Yeah. So we saw that in the demonstration of Live, although to your point, the Mac calls them hints. So in VoiceOver, which is the Mac screen reader, you can turn hints on and off. In Windows screen readers, you probably find that as a tooltip, and your screen reader may or may not automatically announce them and give you the option of turning them off.
I guess this is the classic thing where working with the community comes in. I guess you don't have to know all this stuff, but it's stuff that will get flagged so quickly when you test it with someone and then they report back. Actually, that's that could be clearer if it spoke like the rest of the things that I use. So yeah, don't feel like you have to know absolutely everything, because that stuff will come out in the wash.
People will tell you, believe me.
Any more hands up?
Thank you very much. I think I have a question which ties into the previous. So I think a lot of what we are trying to do in UX design is trying to compress a lot of information into a good user experience. And so in the Osara demo before, you showed that there was an option to turn off certain explanations, right? And I was wondering, especially as we are at the AudioDev conference here, if there have been efforts to use sound cues to describe certain areas of the software, for example, that you have like a click one, right? One for like tracks instead of saying like track 1, track 2, you know? Yeah, I think this probably happens on a user level above the API. Just wondering if there have been efforts.
It's been done. The problem with audio cues like that, when you're producing audio, is that was that a cue or was that part of the track? So speech, stroke braille, stroke good focus for magnification, etc., is the preferred way forward.
Sorry, Tim, carry on.
So I think there is a case for audio cues, but you've got to be pretty careful about how you use them.
There is work being done at the moment on haptic feedback for those kinds of things instead of audio cues, so that it doesn't interfere with the audio.
Yeah.
So I know that there's do you know the names of the? I can't remember the name of the person, people doing it, but there's quite a few people, working on haptic feedback for that very purpose.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel so far. That was very interesting. I was wondering, in my company, a form of accessibility need that we've been having so far, like the first one that comes up, is not related at all to what we've been discussing so far. Sorry about that. But it's about language accessibility. And that also echoes with what was being said just before, where when we design visual interfaces, we try to be compact because we make professional software with a lot of controls and we run out of visual space. And so sometimes we tend to use fairly obscure words that may be hard to understand for non-native English speakers or even for native English speakers who are just discovering the software, and maybe very hard, as I said, yes, for non-native English speakers or people who may not speak English at all. Is that something you have experience with? I mean, I know we're among an audience of English-speaking people. And I was wondering if you had any reflections regarding this, because, for example, I think today this panel was accessible to people who are not able to see, but it wouldn't be accessible to people who don't speak English. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
Multi-language support is a biggie. Most screen readers support multiple languages. So if you have particularly obscure terminology, most also support custom dictionaries. So the user could substitute in their own term, and you refer them to the manual, obviously. But multiple languages aren't necessarily a problem. And some provide support that if your user interface for some reason needs multiple languages, that they're intelligent enough to flip if you provide appropriate tagging. For non-screen reader applications, maybe if you're trying to support people with dyslexia, that's important. I know colour contrast and colour scheme can be important there, but I don't know how the support applications work, but it's a very good question. I assume that those applications also support multiple languages.
So I think some of this also comes back to documenting your software, right? If you could provide a glossary for those terms that's more easy to translate, maybe that's a potential solution than just making sure people know that those resources exist. I was wondering if we go to Tim Yates, because obviously AMIC, the Accessible Musical Instrument Collection, aspires to be a global thing. Is this something that you guys have explored?
We haven't got that far yet, no, unfortunately. But obviously, it is an issue. I mean, language is a complex thing. I mean, I think in particular with documentation and things like that, there is always more than one way to express the same thing. And, you know, there are languages like Easy Read out there that are explicitly designed to be incredibly accessible. And so the more information that can be kind of expressed in those kinds of ways, obviously, is incredibly valuable. I think often we're dealing with niches and small groups of people doing work, and that inevitably means, I think, that a lot of the time things don't get translated because there's not the resources and things to do that. And so, yeah, it is obviously really, really important. And as we go along, that will be something that we're definitely thinking about. Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Thank you. So
I would also
Liza.
add that, you know, someone that came into music technology with no knowledge of the terminology used, that all of it looked like a foreign language, whether it's in English or not. And as a creative professional, I think the number one for us, as Tim was saying, is that the control is accessible so that you can use it. And we're musicians, so we can listen and we can hear what it does. And if you want to get into reading the manual, it's great if it's available in a range of options and easy read for sure. But I think it's not the priority, because right now it's just accessing the controls in the first place that we need to happen first.
Yeah, so some of that is interface design and making the effect of whatever it is you're trying to do really immediate, and making the controls really responsive so you get that kind of auditory feedback right away of what each thing is doing. So we've got time for probably one more quick question.
Earlier in the year, Apple announced accessibility nutrition labels for App Store developers. And I was just wondering if there are any similar kind of initiatives across musical instruments and software, possibly similar to what Tim was saying about trying to make AMEC, doing that, if there are any similar kind of initiatives across the industry for music in particular, if there's anything similar.
Well, it's a very much an active question, something we're working on at the moment. One of the issues that we're already finding with AMEC, and we will find as we go along, is how on earth do we taxonomize such a collection? You know, it's got to be findable. Things have to be searchable. I'm working with AD from Mobile Cities, is over there a lot on this, and various other people. You know, it's very, very difficult because the boundaries are very, very blurred. An accessible guitar may not look anything like a guitar. You may not play it like a guitar, but it may still nonetheless function as an accessible guitar. And so how on earth do we taxonomize that so somebody who's new can find that thing as an accessible guitar? Well, we don't, you know, at the moment we don't know the answer. What we kind of discovered and what we're working on is that taxonomization and searchability is a process. It's not a hierarchical system that you impose. It's a process which gets done by the users and all of the people involved in that. And so the goal will be, as we go along, will be to capture real practice. What in fact does get used as an accessible guitar? If we know that, we can put that into the system. And so setting standards and taxonomizing and those kinds of things, it is very tricky, and I don't think it's going to work terribly well in the kind of traditional, you know, hostel sax. This is a membraphone, you know, whatever it is. That probably isn't going to work. And so what we're hoping is that we can find ways, and maybe AI, for example, might help us to kind of pass non-standard data, you know, stories and you know, just free text where people kind of explain what they do and how they do it, so that we can capture that kind of information and then kind of build that into the system. Again, very much an open question, and anybody who has any interesting thoughts or ideas about that, I would really love to talk about that, because it's very much not a solved problem.
Yeah, so I think the Apple nutrition labels are a good start. I also think there's the work that's been done in the gaming field. So I think it's the Accessible Gaming Initiative. So they've come up with a series of tags which are now live on, I think, the PlayStation Store, for example. So any software, any game you buy off the store says what accessibility features are available in that game. And it's great to see that stuff available at retail. And we need to see that in the music world as well. But working out exactly what those tags should be, that's a massive job. Yeah. So I think that's probably all we've got time for in this half, but we do have a whole other half coming up later. We've now got a 30-minute break, and then we've got 2 great spotlight sessions, which are going to be a little bit more kind of practical and dynamic. And then following that, we've got a bit more time, about 20 minutes, hopefully, for this open discussion. But yeah, see you all in about half an hour. We're going to start promptly at 20 to 4. Welcome back. Hello, hello, hello. So we now enter our second half. We've got 2 amazing demos coming up. We hope for no technical hitches, but this is where the slightly more risky part of the session where we have live demos. So I'm going to hand over very swiftly to David Shervill and Sam Prouse.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Shervill. I'm the founder of Global Music Vision CIC. We're based in Portsmouth in the United Kingdom, and we facilitate music workshops for people of all ages and abilities to engage in their own music projects. Initially, we work within education, so it's supporting them from the very beginning of education right through to college and university. So that's one strand. We also support adults who either want to begin their journey within music technology or their musical journey. But also, we also support adults that may at one time have been musicians or had a role within the music industry at some level and are looking for a way back in. I'm a sight-impaired sound engineer myself, and everything initially was developed out of my initial frustration of not being able to access musical provision or music technology. And that kind of fed into my education, which is why I'm passionate about supporting people to at least have the opportunity to explore music in an educational setting. My other role is also helping to deliver those sessions. I'm also a practitioner who will go into schools and actually run the workshops, and Sam's also helping me deliver things as well. And I've got a good team of practitioners that also support me to deliver workshops. And one of our key elements is, although we're supporting sight-impaired and various abilities and disabilities, it's also about bridging the gap between mainstream and specialist education. So regardless of your ability, you can all interact and engage within the same session. And that's something that we're very, very passionate about. And within that, education can only be achieved if the technology is accessible and allows us to deliver it in a safe and friendly environment. So, for example, for myself, I know that I need magnification. I may need a screen reader depending on the type of software we're using. But most of the time now, because technology's moved on, that is usable and it works most of the time. But there are circumstances where it still doesn't quite work. So we have to go with a bit of an old school approach. I'm hoping that slide's changed. Did that change, Sam?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. Is that cool? Thank you very much. So on the screen now, we've got a 3rd gen Focusrite sound card and an Arturia Keylab MK2 keyboard. And what we've done, we've used raised dots to put on the gains and the pots for the gains and the headphones. And I think it's the main output as well. They've all got raised dots on, so you can feel where you are within terms of the gains and positions of the dials. And then on the keyboard, we've got a musical scale, and I think it's in the key of A, if I remember rightly, a key scale of A. And basically that's to help people initially find their finger placement when they're starting to learn to play an instrument. These were some of the old methods that we started out with before technology has got us where we are now. So the newer models, which is the 4th gen for the sound card, and actually the Arturia is now screen reader compliant, and it works across the laptop and within its own systems using screen reader capabilities. So we've integrated that now into our sessions, which has made things much more of a smoother process when collaborating and working. Because again, it's all about bringing people together. My other area is also supporting staff and teaching staff to feel comfortable and confident when working with pupils and adults, to have the resources and knowledge to be able to support them away from the sessions. So if someone's really keen about pursuing a specific area or pursuing maybe even further education or even a career path, we can support with trying to find the best resources. And going back, and I think it was Tim from Drake Music earlier who said resources aren't always available or easy to find. That is a common thing. But we do our best to just try and support people with the right resources. And if we can't find something, then we will try and refer them to someone who can help. Because again, it's always just about supporting people on that journey wherever they are. We're also really keen to make sure that no one slips through the net. And I know that's a really big thing. But being someone who has slipped through the net multiple times, I know how frustrating it is to be told that we can't support you. So our mission is to try and not be in a position where we can't support somebody. Okay, right. Something else that is very apparent to us is technology and equipment can still be a barrier. So this is again where resources are very, very important, and just trying to get the right support from everybody with staff, and working with grassroots organisations, so other charities, community interest companies, and community groups, and working with the wider music industry, bringing everyone together, because then that way different people have different lived experiences, and everybody has a strength, regardless of where you've come from and what your musical journey has been. You all have a strength that can help shape the future to shape the next generation of music makers, the next generation of producers, the next generation of any kind of pathway within the music industry. And if you want to take it one step further, sound industry, because sound's almost in everything nowadays. So we're really passionate about being able to create those conversations and then eventually create those results where people can all pursue their creative interests regardless of what they are. But the only way we can do that is all by coming together, collaborating, sharing ideas and sharing knowledge, and just being that support network. And that's starting with the grassroots, with the charities, with the education, with the schools, and that's also with your bigger industry companies that are creating products, creating instruments, and even venues as well. When people are looking to try out equipment and look for resources, if you have a fixed venue or you've got a space that people can come and view things, that's great. But how do they get into that space? Is it all one level? Are there lifts available? And even if they're looking online, because websites are pretty much like another shop window, can they find the resources? How many clicks is it on the website to actually get to the area that you're looking for, and having those resources available? These are all things just to think about that actually overall shape the process of someone going, I really want to be able to do this, to actually, I can't do it because I can't get the manual, or I can't find the updates. And unless there's a good way on the website to actually find the contact us or get in touch to be sent the information, it's another way that could close the door. So I think it's a rule of maybe like no more than 3 clicks to find what you're looking for. So if you think about that, how many clicks do they have to get your download or to get a manual? And if we can address all of that, that then creates this bigger picture of being able to make things more accessible, more inclusive. If you want to find out more about us, did that change? If you want to find out more about us...
Other way, Dave.
Okay, I'll leave it for a second. But if you want to find out more about us, you can contact us on email at globalmusicviz, and that's VIS for sugar, at AOL.com. Or you can follow us on social media at globalmusicviz, or you can visit our website at www.globalmusicvisions.co.uk. And together, I think we can have an impact on everybody's creative process and creative journey, regardless of where they're at. Does anyone have any questions very quickly, or I'd like to pass it over to Sam, who is going to talk in more detail. Cool.
Hi, so I'm Sam. I'm a music technologist. I've been interested in music technology for 25, 30 years now, I suppose, from DJing and production to start with, and then kind of going more into music technology education. During that process, I started losing my sight and started to rely on accessibility more and more. Sort of kind of know how important it is to people and how important it is, like David was saying, in education to be able to use these tools to educate ourselves. So I've actually gone from kind of being a musician to more going into the development side. I kind of got to the point with accessibility, it was like, it's not happening quick enough. Maybe I need to have a look and start doing it myself. So I decided to do a Master of Science and learn software development and plugin development in Juice. And whilst going through that, I came up with some ways of working that I think that have helped my process a lot. Unlike a lot of people, I started with accessibility first, and I learned the front-end accessibility, and then started to look more at DSP and plugin architecture. So I've kind of taken a different entry point to a lot of people because I wanted to be accessibility first in my work. I thought that would make sense. And I want to share something today that I came up with during my Masters, which was a kind of, it's based upon the hierarchy of needs, but for software design. And I think there's a process that we can kind of all follow here that kind of really helps concrete making things universal. And you see at the bottom, we've got the fundamental principles of design, and that's the kind of things that we go to college and university, we learn about and we put into practice. But I find none of that seems to cover accessibility. It covers everything else, and we look at the golden ratios and how to make things beautiful and all those kind of design things, but it never really touches on the core of accessibility. So I believe on top of that, we have a hierarchy of needs for the user of software. And I believe that starts with experience design. I think that's something that needs to come early in projects. Quite often it can be left too late, and we'll kind of have these cool ideas about the product, but the designs are already made, et cetera, it becomes a cost point, things like that. So it's something that kind of gets forgotten. But I think in music, especially in music technology, experience design is really important because we do have experiences. We have soul experiences of producing. We have experience of playing to people, of jamming together. So I think it's really important to think about that in the initial design stages before moving on too far, so things don't get overlooked, and making sure that everything works and is kind of, we're not missing anything out. And then next to that, I have a new kind of concept. It's called dystopian visions. It's also known as the Cassandra effect, based on the Greek Cassandra, who was given the gift of foresight. And it's actually about thinking about things. I added this because I'm working with AI currently. I want to use it as a tool to benefit accessibility. But also something that worries me is it can also de-skill people. So I kind of look at everything and think, is that a feature that's going to help people? Is it going to help them learn? Is it going to encourage them to do more? Or is it going to de-skill people? And I think it's a really important thing to think at the beginning of a design cycle about these ideas and about the impact of them and what that might be. A great example would be Snapchat filters and things like that when they came out. Somebody thought, oh, cool idea. It takes users straight to the point of joy at the top, fantastic, but nobody thought about the long-term effect that that's had on body image. So if somebody thought about that in the beginning, maybe it wouldn't have been such a good idea. So we can kind of look at a lot of things like that, and I think especially important with AI now that it doesn't de-skill us, it doesn't take anything away from us. It should be a tool to improve and help. So then next we have user-centered design, which is something we've been talking about a lot today. Get users in from the earliest stages and design and collaborate with people in the community, because you'll build a much more coherent project from the ground up. Even someone like myself who's had problems with visual impairments and understand accessibility well, I always overlook things as well. It's easily done, and that's why it's been great working with David, because he doesn't just have his own lived experience, but he has the experience of everybody he's worked with in the community and the troubles that they've had accessing. So I come up with some great designs sometimes, and David will be like, hey, have you thought about? And it's like, no. And that's why it's really important to include people really early in that design stage, because it can save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. The next stage that I go through is interaction design. Once I've thought about who's using the software and what they're going to use it for and what their needs are, we then need to come up with a set of interactions that can work for that person and work across a multiple workflow. And we can only do that by starting with a user-centered design process where we kind of encourage and build on that. And then we can see how people need to interact and kind of work around that. On top of that, we have user experience and interaction experience, which we all kind of know, different things that are gradable. And on the top, I have this triangle, joy. And the idea of that is joy of use is a term that I really like. And I think ultimately, as a developer, what we like to hear was that software was a joy to use. It worked. I'd done my job well. You know, like for me, that's the ultimate, is somebody enjoyed using it. They were being creative and it didn't block the creative flow. So I think that's where we want our users to be, is at the top of this triangle. But if we don't have these pieces underneath to make the perfect foundation, that triangle's never going to work, because nobody's going to get to that point, or not everybody is going to get to that point. So I think we can definitely view that as a hierarchy of needs. And it also gives us 5 measurable qualities on top. Usability can be measured, accessibility, user experience, the interaction experience, and how much we enjoyed the software. So it actually, when we've gone through the stage and we've developed and we're testing and we're getting our data back, it's actually a really nice way to look at things, is we can build a radar chart or a spider chart, as they're sometimes known, and we can map the scores that we get back from our software analysis. And it's actually a really nice way to look and to see if any areas are particularly lacking. Because if we've missed some things with interaction or accessibility, then we're going to have flat spots on those sides and people aren't going to reach the peak. So it's a really nice way of actually analysing data afterwards. And some of the things we can kind of measure, usability, the effectiveness, goal achievement, the task completion rate, how accurate it was, the outcome quality, efficiency, again, the task completion time, the amount of effort required, how easy it was to use. So making information accessible and manuals accessible is really important. The productivity, these are all things that we can kind of ask about and measure with our customers. Learnability, another great thing that's really important with accessibility, is making the platform learnable. And making sure that documentation itself is accessible, which can often be a problem, and actually documenting all the accessibility features as well. I've gone to use several things and it has accessibility, but it's not very well documented. So you're kind of working out by trial and error how to make this stuff work, and it's time consuming. And as creatives, we don't like reading manuals. We just like to do and be in the moment. So I think it's really important to kind of think of that. And the onboarding experience is part of that. Having a good onboarding experience to bring people in and teach them makes it a much smoother journey for people. And that helps them with retention of skills. It needs to be robust, compatibility, semantic markup needs to be correct. And something we were talking about earlier, I call it graceful degradation, is where things change and then it wipes out earlier versions, things that people were using that work. So I think we always need to be thinking as well, when we create new systems, is it going to block somebody's workflow? Are they going to have to just stay on an older system for a long time because that's the way they work? So I think that's something really needs to be focused on, is that and then maintaining that functionality through versions. Accessibility, it needs to be perceivable. We need to have alt text, captions and transcripts. The content needs to be adaptable. Contrast ratio is something that's really important for low vision users and often gets overlooked, is the color contrast between text and background, but also non-text content, which is sliders, buttons, etc. Their contrast against the background as well. And a lot of software, it's not great. It only just meets the kind of minimum requirements. And the best way is to have customization. If people can customize the color schemes, because there is no one color scheme that works for everyone, unfortunately. Depending on people's color awareness, color vision, these kind of things, that can completely change the contrast ratio of a software. So it needs to have more than one or two options, light mode and dark mode, is really useful, but we also need other modes that remove color and that don't use color as a signifier. Operability, keyboard accessibility, as we've been talking about, is really important, as well as having voiceover and screen reader support. Having keyboard accessibility will open it up to people with motor difficulties. A much wider range of abilities and disabilities can be catered for. Input assistance, we want responsive designs, understandable, it needs to be readable. As Tim was saying earlier, consistent navigation, tab index or focus order, whichever way you want to look at it, is super important. It's how someone with a screen reader knows software. It is almost a linear list. So it needs to be predictable always. And something else that comes up that I don't often see is error correction and error prevention. Especially if we're allowing users to type values. I've been working with voice control, which is why I use this a lot. So if someone enters a range that's above the maximum range, it actually feeds back and tells them that was above the maximum range. The range of this parameter is from A to B. And so that gives you the error correction and the error prevention and helps people, because the last thing we want to do is slam a volume to maximum and hurt someone's ears or break their speakers. So I think that's something that often gets overlooked, is that kind of error prevention when we're using audio software. And again, as I said, documentation, document the accessibility, but also make sure the documents themselves are accessible. Really, really important. And if you can, integrate that into the software. Tooltips, those kind of things can be super useful. User experience, we all kind of know desirability, usefulness. These are all the kind of things we can measure when we're looking at the user experience overall. Interaction experience is feedback. We want it to be responsive. We want clarity. Preferably user control where possible, customization. Earcons, which are sounds that are like icons, can be really useful. Contextual relevance. And again, coming back to like personalization and customization are really important in universal design, because there is no one glove fits all solution, unfortunately. And having a range of customization can really help then people fit that piece of software or hardware into their workflow. And then joy of use, which I really like this term, and people should have an emotional resonance and engagement. Moments of delight where you have a happy accident, something happens and you're like, wow, I didn't expect that. That's really cool. It should be meaningful, it should align with the purpose. So for us, it's making music, it should make making music easy. Surprise and novelty. We want a certain amount, but we don't want too much. If it's too novel or too much of a surprise, it can be a little bit too much for people. It's having that right balance. It needs to be innovative, but too much, and it can become confusing, it can become cluttered. We want long-term satisfaction. That's what we really want from our customers. So loyalty and retention, post-use reflection is really important. So keeping testing going for after the product's released, keeping that iteration going with updates and things. I'm going to go now and show you a little demonstration of a couple of things I've been working on recently. Bear with me for a second. So I've been working a lot recently with the Web Audio API. I plan to start making plugins again in Juice soon, and I want to use web UIs. So I wanted to actually really learn the accessibility that's available with HTML and JavaScript, and especially like the ARIA attributes, which are super useful for when we're making things accessible. Just going to turn the screen reader on. He said.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Document. Google Chrome. Mxshi button. Control S49 MK3 main. MIDI device. Menu pop-up collapsed. But channel 1. MIDI channel. Menu
So we have
pop-up
a MIDI
collapsed.
inputs and
Button.
outputs.
You are X 0.50. Y 0.50. Vector pad. Slider.
So this is a custom component that I've built, and this is what I really like about using JavaScript and web front end is you can actually really customize things, and it's super useful. So this is actually drawn in Canvas. It's a two-dimensional canvas. And as for the node, we can actually make in JavaScript, we can create focusable elements. So I've attached a focusable element, and it uses the role of a slider. But also in ARIA, we can have ARIA role description, so we can actually give that component its own name. So it takes on the attributes of the slider, but it can actually be called whatever we want to call it then. And I can actually use that now with just simple keyboard navigation, the up, down, left and right arrows.
X0.51, Y0.50, X
So you can see we can move in
0.75,
two dimensions.
Y0.50, X0.76, Y0.41, X0.88, Y0.
So as you can see, it works like a normal slider, just a two-dimensional slider. Focus goes to the main area, and then for the feedback, I'm using ARIA Live, which is really, really useful. It means that you don't actually have to be focused on that particular component to retrieve a value from it. So it is really useful in a lot of situations. Another area where I've been using it quite a lot is with MIDI mapping.
Vector pad.
So I've set up a simple way of MIDI mapping. We can just press the M key.
0.89. MIDI learn activated for focused control.
I'll just move a control now.
0.02, 0.49, 0.5, 0.69,
And that gives us constant feedback through the screen reader then.
0.74. Vector pad X set to 0.71.
So that's something that I found really useful, is just being able to map any controller to any piece of software. I know it's kind of like the NI and Arturia have been doing it for a while now, and it's a really nice system. People are using it a lot and find it really useful. So yeah, kind of something I wanted to include, but make kind of more open, so any kind of controller can be mapped to anything, which I think is kind of really important. I'm just going to turn the screen reader off.
Voiceover off.
So I'm just going to go back. Each of my projects, I tend to create two UIs, and this is what I was kind of talking about earlier, is having the kind of level of customization.
Go for like 2 minutes, let's go.
2 minutes, yeah. So I have a set of interface settings. There's a bunch of presets, which are basically the basic classic light, dark, that kind of thing. I like to give the user full control of font and font sizes. I think that's really important, and also letter spacing, word spacing, line spacing, that kind of thing, depending on people's visual impairments, can be really, really important. Every item in the UI has its own set of color pickers attached, so that every item in the UI can be customized. That can, again, really help with low vision users, just to get the right kind of contrast level, which is what I was sort of talking about earlier. And if we actually supply mechanisms like this, we don't have to worry about meeting the contrast ratio, because people can actually set it themselves. And some of these are just kind of decorative. We can change border thicknesses, we can change radiuses. Quite important that we're talking about earlier is focus and showing focus when we're using keyboard navigation. I know a lot of people tend to hide it, but I like to give a control that gives focus size. So if you don't really need it, you can make it nice and small, tuck it out the way. But if it's something you're using, then you can make it much larger, and it's much easier to see. I think that's about all we've got time for today.
Just two very quick things. Has anyone in the room heard of an access rider? Just give me some verbal yes, no. No. So very quickly, an access rider is something that an individual can use to establish what needs they need to have in place, or assistive technology, or anything that they need to support them to be able to undertake a task. And you can do that as an activity. It could be that they need, for me, it would be a screen reader or magnification on the laptop. It could be that I need to have natural light. So it's a document that someone can use to establish what support they need to undertake something. So that's just something to bear in mind, particularly within an organizational role. When thinking about providing opportunities for people in the future, just maybe look up an accessibility rider, and that might give you some good guidelines as well.
I think that's a really important point, because what we're talking about there is normalizing accessibility and access rider becoming, so I guess I'm talking in the context of events here, but when an artist has a general rider, having an access section as part of that, that every artist would effectively fill out the same form, but there's just a section about access as standard. I think it's that kind of thing that enables kind of true accessibility, really, because it's just normal for everyone. It's not an extra thing. But yeah, I'm very, very sorry. We do have to draw this section to a close right now. But I mean, you guys have an in-depth session on Wednesday morning where, Sam, you're going to be demonstrating a lot more of the kind of nuts and bolts. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. I'm actually going to be showing a lot of code examples of how to set up ARIA live regions, how to create the MIDI mapping, how to get things spoken. So we're going to do a real deep dive into the code side of it with a lot of real-world examples and other projects that I've built.
Cool. So if you're into web stuff, be there Wednesday morning. It's here, right?
This room, Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. Yeah, bright and early.
Amazing. Well, David, Sam, thank you so much. That was fascinating. We'll take 5 minutes now just to change the stage, but round of applause. Okay. Record time, Formula One pit stop there. Very, very happy to introduce Tim Adnitt from Native Instruments. The floor is yours,
Jay.
Tim.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. Great to be here. I'm Tim Adnitt. As Jay just said, yes, another Tim, the third Tim on this panel. There's kind of a theme. I don't know if that's intentional.
50% Tim.
Yeah. As Jay said, I'm VP of Products at Native Instruments, and I've worked there for the last 12 years, both in product design and now in product management. And at NI, I work with all of the teams that are responsible for building Native Instruments branded products. So we obviously work with Isotope and Plugin Alliance Brainworks. I look after the Native Instruments bit. Now, before I get started, I do want to say a big thank you to the organizers of ADC, of course, also to Jay for inviting me today to share a little bit about accessibility for NI's Control Mark III keyboards, which focuses primarily on visual impairment. So jumping into the topic, what was our overarching goal with accessibility and Control Mark III? Simply put, to make a better UX for everyone. Now, good UX is an accessible UX, and designing for accessibility makes a UX universally better, because it encourages thinking around topics such as spatial navigation in the case of hardware, and clarity when communicating information, the number of interactions required to achieve a particular outcome, and so on and so on and so on. And to work towards this goal, we essentially focused on 4 key principles. So next slide. The first one, simple. So interactions must be easy to understand, and spoken information communicated clearly with minimal verbosity. And as per the original Mark I and Mark II design, there are 3 interaction paradigms under this principle, which you see on the screen. So pushing a button speaks its function. Touching an encoder speaks its function. And then turning an encoder speaks its value. And you'll notice that none of this is fundamentally accessibility specific. Nobody is going to complain that an interface is simple to use. In fact, it's quite the opposite, right? So referring you back, designing for accessibility makes a UX that is universally better. Next principle, the second one, universal. So everything that the hardware can do must be accessible. Now, writing and playing music, as we all know, by definition is a creative pursuit. And as with anything creative, maximizing flow and therefore minimizing any additional cognitive load is paramount. And that's the core premise of Control, at least when it comes to playing and sculpting instruments. And that's been true really since the beginning. And what it means in practice is that things like door navigation, finding NKS plugins, adjusting NKS plugins, non-NKS plugins, stock door plugins, controlling external hardware, and on and on and on, must be possible not just from software, but directly from the Control Mark III hardware. And the experience must essentially be the same for sighted, sighted and visually impaired producers and musicians alike. Or in other words, the word I've got up here, accessibility support must be universal across the entire hardware device. That's our second principle. Third principle, the approach must be scalable and maintainable. Now, this is particularly important, especially when you're dealing with a large and complex product, which this is, and one that multiple teams of people are contributing to and integrating with, and not only people at NI, but actually people outside the company too. And that all means that adding new features and making sure that they're accessible is far easier. So it means fewer bugs, and that in turn means more time spent on building new capabilities and improving the base behavior. Next one is a theme you've heard a lot today. Number 4, built with the community. So you heard Jay, Liza, Tim, and Sam all talk about this earlier, and it is a must for any product, period. It's particularly important, though, when you're not necessarily designing for your own lived experience. So very, very, very important, build with the community. And I should say at this point, Control Mark 3 was not accessible on day one, but we knew that it would be. So we were able to build the hardware with accessibility in mind from the very start. So we had ongoing user research, we had user tests, all sorts of things you've heard about today. And we've got things like, raised dots on the back, so you know which input is which, and those kinds of things that fed into the hardware. And that happened throughout the whole development process. Now, all this to say, the Control Mark 3 hardware was not an accessibility retrofit situation, which, as you heard Tim Burgess say earlier, is the best way round to be. But it does need to interact with and integrate deeply with plugins from NI and plugins from our hundreds of partners and the DAWs. And we're now, by my reckoning, about 35 plus years into the software revolution, as it was back in the 90s in music technology. And at least a sizable selection of the software that we use has sometimes multiple decades of legacy. So for example, Aaron Contact was first released in 2002, which is more than 23 years ago, which seems insane, but it's true. Now, of course, all this software has been modernized, but many of the interaction paradigms and approaches predate at least our accessibility support. So whilst accessibility for the Control Mark 3 hardware was not a retrofit situation, there is a substantial software retrofit element in the mix. So taking all of this context and those 4 core principles, a team of engineers at NI, led by colleagues of mine, Vincenzo Pacea, Steve Penny, and Tim Ray, and supported by people you've heard from today, in fact. So Tim Burgess supported, Andre Louis supported us a lot, sat over there on the table to my left, Chris Ankin, many other people from the community, came up with a concept for a less invasive universal accessibility retrofit kit. I quote one of the engineers with that. And at the core of this, there's an application that runs on your computer that's called the NI Accessibility Helper. And this was already central to the Mxshi Mark III accessibility that launched a few years ago. And it's now also a key component of the Control Mark III accessibility. So over the next couple of slides, we're just going to take a high-level look at how the NI Accessibility Helper and the architecture around it differs on Control Mark III when compared to Mark I and Mark II, which fundamentally were the same. And crucially, we'll have a look at what that all means for the accessibility user experience. So for Control Mark I and Mark II, it looks nice and simple, but everything related to accessibility is in what we call the presentation layer, and also in the complete control application, so the software. So you can see that shown in orange on the slide. And this is essentially equivalent to what's shown physically on the keyboard screen. So it's really running and integrated almost at pixel level. And by definition, that means that everything related to accessibility needs to be directly related to what we call the GUI layer. And accessibility is therefore essentially limited to situations where the hardware is speaking directly to and only to complete control software. So coming back to those core principles to test it against that, is it simple to use? Well, yes, I hope so. It uses the same interaction paradigms that we continue to use today. But is it universal? No. It's very specifically tied to complete control software, and it cannot cover things like hardware settings or MIDI mode or door control or indeed any other software application. It's always funneled through one. And we all know that when we make music, we use lots of different applications, lots of different plugins, lots of different things. Is it scalable and maintainable? Not easily so. So the implementation is very complete control specific. So adding support in other applications that don't necessarily share the same architecture or the same technology stack, for example, Contact, means an awful lot of additional work and fewer possibilities of reusing existing code. It's also potentially, there's a lot of potential for bugs to creep in this situation as well. So moving over to Control Mark 3, the diagram looks more complicated, but that's because it just does more. It's far more capable. So looking at that, here we've got a device that's actually an embedded hardware device. So it has an operating system running on it, and it actually runs its own software applications as well. And this means that accessibility support can sit on the hardware itself. And it's all supported by that NI accessibility helper. So again, I've just shown this in orange on the slide. It's moved from the software layer over to the hardware. And the logic for it all sits a layer deeper than the Mark 1 and Mark 2. So it sits directly in the data model. And that's an abstraction layer that holds the actual text strings themselves and the data that is displayed to the user on the hardware screen, which you'll see in just a moment. Now, when an event's triggered, using any one of those three interaction paradigms that I mentioned earlier, so pressing a button, touching an encoder, or turning an encoder, the NI accessibility helper, which is there running on the computer, as I mentioned earlier, pulls the information directly from the data model, and that is then what is spoken. So in other words, the accessibility layer has been separated out from the applications themselves, and it's completely transparent to any application that supports a direct connection to the hardware. So as of today, that's now Contact, it's complete control software, and it's Mxshi. And there's more to come, of course. So quite a lot of technology things in there. But what does it all mean for the user experience? That's the important thing. That's what all of this serves, right? And what it means is that any functionality controlled by the hardware user interface can be accessible, or in simpler terms, anything that is shown on the Control Mark 3 screen can be spoken via the accessibility helper. As long as the data model knows about a text string, it can be spoken, and the data model has to know about a text string in order to show it on the screen. So by definition, what a sighted user sees is what the screen reader is able to read out. A little bit like what you saw with Ableton earlier, or with Reaper, or any of these software applications, but this is happening on hardware instead. So to give some concrete examples, this means that in addition to browsing and instrument parameters and those kinds of things when using complete control software, on-device play assist features, that's things like scale, arpeggiator, this kind of stuff, door control, MIDI templates, if you want to control external hardware, the hardware device settings, all of these things are now fully accessible for the first time, all again via those three interaction paradigms that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to jump over to the keyboard and we'll take a quick look. So let me just get myself set up here, move over to Logic. Oh, actually I want to move over to the camera, right? There we go, great. Good, so I'm actually going to start, I was going to start actually with no software open, but I decided not to risk it. But I could not be running Logic here, I could not have Contact loaded. I could literally just have the NI accessibility helper quietly running in the background, and I could already enable the accessibility mode. And we do that in exactly the same way as we do on the Mark 1 keyboard and the Mark 2 keyboard. It's with a spatial instruction, which is the top left button and the top right button. So very, very easy to find if you can't see it. So I'll do that.
Accessibility mode on.
And very slow speech, so apologies to screen reader users in the room, but I have to have it slower, I don't understand it. So it'll just tell you that it's enabled that. And I'm going to start with something that has nothing to do with Contact or the DAW or anything at all, just hardware stuff.
MIDI.
And I'm going to go into
Shift. Settings.
The settings page. So this is the settings of the hardware, and this is completely new here. And using those same interaction paradigms I talked about, I can control any of, and I'm not going to go through them all, but any of the things happening on the hardware. So let's say, for example, keyboard. I touch the knob.
Sensitivity, velocity, linear.
So it's told me which parameter I'm on. Now I'm going to change the parameter.
Hard 1. Hard 2.
So I'm turning the knob and it's telling me what the value is. So
Hard
very
1,
simple.
linear.
You've heard me press a button, it tells me what it's going to do or what it does. You've heard me touch one of the encoders, it tells me what the parameter is. Now you've heard me turn it tells me what the value is. And if you know those three things, you can use this keyboard. That's the general principle behind it. So already before we even get to the DAW and we get to instruments, you can see how the principle of being universal surfaces in the user experience, just with these simple settings pages. There's some important things in here, things like aftertouch. Do you want it polyphonic or do you want it monophonic? So some fundamental capabilities that really matter that you can now get at. So let's move over into Logic. So Logic's just my DAW of choice. This works really great with Ableton too, and other DAWs, but I just am a long-standing Logic user, so I'm going to just demo with that. So I'm going to start with the DAW level. And what you can see on the screen here is the mixer. And very simple, I've just got 4 tracks set up here that I set up earlier just for the sake of simplicity.
Contact 2.
I can navigate them, and I haven't even got voiceover turned on actually on the computer. So if you want to use Logic, if someone like Andre is using Logic, there'll be lots of other things coming out here and the ability to move between the two. But just to keep my life simple, I'm just using this one.
Logic instrument.
And it'll tell me exactly what track I'm on. If I want to change the volume.
Contact 1, volume, plus 0.1.
So it's told me the track that I'm on, it's told me the parameter I'm about to change, and turning it.
Minus 1.7, minus 2.7.
And so on and so on. So same 3 paradigms, all applied to the DAW. There's also pan in there, so I can move to pan.
Shift, 4D encoder up. Log minus 1.
Oops, sorry.
Minus 2. Logic instrument, pan, minus 2. Minus 6.
It's exactly the same things. I'm just touching the encoder, turning the encoder, and it's telling me what it's doing.
Shift.
And we also have mute and solo in
Shift, 4D encoder down.
So moving to Contact.
Contact 1.
So as Jay mentioned earlier, the Contact to a Complete control plugins kind of represent the most detailed level of this kind of plug and play instrument control that we have on Control Mark 3. And that's all powered by this thing that we call Native Control Standard. You may have heard people mention this before. So NKS and more recently NKS2, which we introduced with this keyboard, those products all have additional metadata, essentially, that allows developers to optimize and customize the experience that you have when using it with the keyboard within a certain set of parameters. And it's supported by hundreds of our partners and thousands of Contact and VST instruments by now. And any of these NKS products, by definition, are accessible. So there's no additional work that has to be done. If it's an NKS plugin, it will be accessible using this system. So with Contact, I'm going to go into the browser. So again, I'm pressing a button.
Contact 1.
And I know exactly where I am. I'm going to touch the product button.
Product, empty.
Sorry, knob. And I'm going to select
LCO prod STR.
So
Piano Uno. Odes. LCO prod STR.
You can't see the video anymore. Let me move this window over here. Thank you, Adil. Good. So anyway, what I was doing there was just turning
Product,
this.
LCO prod STR. Odes. LCO prod STR.
So it's just going to run through all of the products I've got installed. Here we just have the 3, but many systems will have hundreds, thousands even of instruments installed. So I'm going into this one, and then I can move over, for example, to, again, the same paradigms to the results list, and move down this, and it stopped talking to me for some reason.
Brand, product, LCO prod STR.
Okay, I've just found a bug. Excellent. But anyway, I'm going to choose one of the presets here, and I'm going to load it.
Load.
And hopefully, there we go. So that's now loaded, and now I'm in essentially the kind of instrument control mode, which we call plugin mode. So again, all the same things apply. Get nice pretty things on the screen, but I can go to any parameter and move around it and do things like, if I go to page 2.
Last page.
Convolution.
Convolution. Off on. Off. On. Convolution. Amount. 12.4. 3.9.
And so on and so forth. So again, same paradigms, very, very simple to control. And certain instruments, depending on the instrument, they'll have an edit mode where you can just go into more depth. We don't have time to go super deep on that here, but you can really get deep in the instruments with NKS2 especially. They have a little edit button, and you can control many, many more of the parameters, which is one of the challenges that we had with Mark 1 and Mark 2 and earlier NKS support. If you have 70 pages of parameters, that's not necessarily good. With this one, they're actually tabbed and divided, and there's a performance mode plus a kind of, we call it performance mode, which is the main parameters, and then there's edit mode underneath that. So that was something else that we were able to do. So short on time, so I'm not going to go any further with those, but what I did want to mention, if I go to the next track in Logic.
Contact 2.
Here was Odes.
Logic instrument.
Here we go. So.
Quick sampler. Single sample. Stereo.
Thank you. So now I've got a Logic instrument. So this isn't an NKS instrument. It's not Contact. It's Logic's stock sampler. And I've selected a track with that on. And again, something that wasn't possible on the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 and is now possible with this architecture is for us to control those instruments too. And again, this also works in Ableton and some of the other DAWs, thanks to their collaboration with us. So here what I've got are all of the parameters that Logic gives to the automation lanes, essentially, for these devices. So this is the quick sampler. If I do the same thing again.
Fine tune, 0.
So touching it tells me what it is, turning it.
+5, +9, +12, +50, +15.
So now I'm able to control NKS instruments in a deeper way than I could before, and I'm able to control any of the stock instruments. And that also goes for the plugin chain. So if I go to the next plugin, I've got a channel EQ loaded up.
Channel EQ, SS.
Then again, using exactly the same paradigms.
Low shelf gain, 0.0. +2.1. +3.3.
And so on and so forth. So I've now got, admittedly not quite as high fidelity control because we're reliant on what's being published by those plugins rather than this bespoke metadata that's been prepared for anything within our ecosystem. But it's still something that wasn't there before and makes these things very usable. And as you can see, things like Logic and Ableton, the layout of these is really good. So you can just use a stock DAW plugin off the bat, no problem. And then the final one that I want to mention.
External hardware.
Is external hardware. So
settings.
Oops, sorry.
MIDI.
So I'm going into MIDI mode here. So MIDI mode also was not accessible previously. So if you ended up on a track that didn't have context, or it didn't have complete control on it in the past, there was really nothing much you could do from the keyboard. So you were always reliant on having that shell in the way. But MIDI templates, what they mean is that you can map anything. You've heard a few people, Sam mentioned it. You heard Liza talk about the importance of MIDI mapping earlier and how that's a really good kind of baseline for everything because you can literally map to anything. And I've just got the default template here. So everything's labeled, CC14.
CC14, 0. 10.
Again, all the same paradigms, just 3 simple things. But this is just labeled this way, but there's also an editor. Again, I don't really have time to go deep on that and show you lots of that. But there's an editor on the device. The editor itself is accessible. So you can call these whatever it is you want to call them. You could have this connected to, pick your favorite hardware device via MIDI. And you can have everything labeled and you can control that, or you could set it up, for example, with the example we saw earlier, the Alien Instruments example. You could actually have those things saying this is X and this is Y for the XY pad, however you want to set it up. There's also a bunch of these available online. So on our forum, we can share the link, but essentially on our forum, there's these KMT files that you can accessibly import into the device, and they live on the hardware. They're all human readable, so they're just JSON files, JSON text files, so even I can understand them, which is, I'm a product guy. As I said, they can be imported, and by definition, they're accessible. If you want to tweak something on it, again, you can do that directly from the device. So that's just a real kind of whistle-stop tour. I could talk about this forever, but what I do want to do is just go back to my slides for a moment and close Logic's channel EQ. Are we there? Yes. So really just summarize, this is essentially how we approached realizing the principles of Control Mark 3 accessibility. Simple, consistent UX paradigms. Again, press a button, touch an encoder, turn an encoder. That's all you need to know. There's also a training mode, which I didn't show here, but that allows you to understand the layout of the device without triggering any actions. So that was something that was a big request for the Mark 1 and Mark 2 that we implemented later in the cycle and then have carried over to the Mark 3. So simple, universal. So it facilitates accessibility across the device. So if we get the flow of the device right in general, then that's not going to be any different whether you're sighted or visually impaired, we hope. And then finally, scalable and maintainable. It is much more scalable. It's much more maintainable. You're not touching a gazillion applications just to make this thing work. It's kind of very centralized. And it plays nicely as well, obviously, with the DAWs and voiceover and all those kinds of other things that you're going to be using. So that really just leaves me to say thank you. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. Thanks again to everyone at ADC, and again, thanks to Jay for organizing what I think has been a really fascinating panel, actually. I've definitely learned a lot myself, too. Hopefully that overview's been useful. You're very, very welcome to take a more in-depth look for yourself, and I definitely encourage you to do so in the accessibility zone, which I believe starts tomorrow. Correct? Yep. And I know that Andre is going to be there, amongst other people, so you can have a personal demo from Andre or myself or anyone else. But please do check it out. If you've got questions, I believe there's a Q&A now, right?
There is,
there's
yes.
a Q&A now. And also you can obviously catch myself or any of my colleagues from NI who are at the conference. Just grab us. I have to leave tomorrow, but I think most people are here for a bulk of the time. So do just grab us. You can also email us and just say enjoy the rest of the conference. And Jay, back to you.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was, awesome overview. Thank you. Really great. Hello. Thank you, Tim. Take a seat for now.
Thank you.
And I think I kind of lost track of who's got head mics and who doesn't. So I think if you still have a mic, come up on stage. And we've got 15 minutes now for Q&A. While people are getting organised, I will just signpost. So Tim, you're doing a session with us at Sound Without Sight next Thursday evening.
Right.
So if you don't get a chance to come to the accessibility zone and have a go, we're going to do an online session on Zoom, more kind of from a community perspective, with the help of Chris Ankin, who supported with the development of the product as well. So yeah, please come along. Thursday evening, you can sign up at soundwithoutsight.org. So I can't see any hands up, but is there any questions on Zoom? Are there any questions on Zoom?
Yeah, so we have one question on Zoom, and that was about the XY pad it was in the web demo, actually. Yeah. And so this is Jürgen saying, what do you think about using more natural ranges for values like this? So rather than using 0.0 or 0.5 or whatever, 0.6, but to use 0 to 10, for example, to just get rid of a bit of that.
Cool. So maybe take the radio mic to Sam.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it depends on the application itself, really. I've done that myself with a couple of applications where I have voice control, and it's actually just easier to say 1, 2, 3 rather than 0.45. But I think it very much depends on the parameter itself. Yeah, I think it has to be a kind of per parameter kind of decision, really. If it helps to kind of make it 0 to 1 or 1 to 10, whichever's kind of easiest, really. I don't think there's a overall preference. It's what suits the job the best, really, I think.
Amazing. So perhaps while people are thinking up questions, we could take some thoughts from the panel about any particular takeaways from today, anything that stood out, anything that, that you'll take away and implement into your practice moving forward. Anyone want to jump in?
I think that, Tim, that was a wonderful demonstration of all the possibilities. And actually, I'm going to take another look at my my software of yours, which I use, and see what I can do with it. Because I think actually, you know, because I'm working with MIDI, and you actually don't often think about all the possibilities for switching within Contact. And yeah, I've not really considered that as an option before, so I'm quite excited. I often use effect racks within Ableton to switch synths, and actually being able to do that within Contact Player itself is something that I've wanted to do for quite a while. So I think I can see how to do that now. So thank you. That's going to be a takeaway for me.
So Contact, that's new news, right?
It was, yeah, with this device. Yeah, and then there's also screen reader support coming for Contact as well. I mean, it's nice to show this, obviously, but this isn't to say we still don't have a lot of work to do. We absolutely do. We still have a lot of work to do, and are kind of gradually working through it. So this is a hardware-first approach, and then, obviously working also on our other applications. So in beta at the moment, we have the first stages of screen reader support for Contact, for example. So that'll be a gradual process again. But again, being supported by a lot of the same people, as you can imagine, who've been fantastic, I really must say. Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Any thoughts from anyone else on the panel?
I'd like to say that was an amazing demonstration, and Tim, you really made me eat my words with regards to a smart instrument, and this really does look like a smart instrument, and it's an amazing device. The door control is super intuitive as well. Good work.
Thank you.
That was a very handy lead in that we didn't actually plan at all. But yeah, for Mxshi, if you'd be suggesting more kind of embedded architecture to handle accessibility stuff and to have you demo that, which, cool stuff.
Yeah, actually, that was something I really noticed, actually, listening to the whole thing and then obviously being last, is we didn't plan this, right? I mean, I didn't know what everyone else was going to talk about. Obviously, you did, but you'll notice that all the same themes came up again and again and again and again. Around working with users. That was a very big theme, and the kinds of things you're talking about architecture. So I think there's a lot of similar thinking happening, which is great. And I think events like this are very, very important, actually, just to kind of bring that thought process together, and obviously a lot of us have met before, but just to remind ourselves that we're all kind of working in the same direction, and the more we can help each other, and the better, really. So that's definitely a kind of the other thing I would add is don't be shy about going for it with accessibility. I mean, we didn't get it right at the start. Andre can tell you some stories about that. He was the first person to ever use it. We didn't get it right from the start. But over time, it's kind of progressed. And as you can see, like even the architecture, we're now on V2 of the architecture. So, I would just urge you to really go for it and just do it.
Yeah. And I think one thing I'd like to add is that, when what we're doing a lot is we're building kind of bespoke instruments for people, and there's always going to be a place for that. That's always going to be necessary. Absolutely. But what we want is for as little of it to be bespoke and as much of it to be commercial and standard as possible. And so the more that this stuff happens, the easier it is for us to do our job, because bespoke is always expensive, it's always time consuming, and it always will be. So the more that we, the less of that we can do, and the more that the standard kit that everybody has is accessible, it makes a massive difference to what we can achieve as well. So, it really is important that this stuff is happening. It makes a huge difference, across the board. Yeah.
Awesome. And what about some thoughts from the crowd? I think we posed the question earlier, what will you take away? What will you do next? What will you implement into your practice based on all the discussions that have happened today? What have you learned? Let's hear from the crowd.
Hey, I just want to say thanks for the panel. It's been really informative. One thing that I think I really found helpful was just something that Tim Yates, that you had said, just about getting the word out and making it such that folks can actually find software. I'm at Eventide, we're working on integrating some the accessibility features in Juice into our plugins, and haven't really thought about beyond getting it out into the world. Like, what do we do after that? And I think just this idea of making it as easy to find for folks as possible is just something that I found very helpful. So thanks for that suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that it is just absolutely vital, and is the thing buried 5 things down in your help menus, those kinds of things. Is that how, like, those click things? Can somebody find it? Is your accessibility thing itself accessible? A lot of the time, it just isn't, and that makes it as unusable as if the thing itself didn't exist. So those things really are just as important and really, really matter. So yeah.
And I think you guys at Native did that quite well around the release of Mxshi. You did a publicity drive around the accessibility, which is great. I think some other companies have done similar stuff, and I always love it if I can go onto a mainstream product's website and accessibility is mentioned in the list of features, among the other flashy new things. Want to see that more and more, but then also see that continued into the manual, and like Dave would say, making sure that manual is available in an accessible format, not just a flattened PDF or something like that, in ideally a flexible kind of web page format that people can adapt to how they need to read it. Any other thoughts?
Hello, everybody. Andre Louis here. So, to Tim A, you thought you had a bug when you loaded LCO strings. It wasn't actually.
No, I just realized.
You turned the reading of presets off. And one thing you didn't touch on, which someone else did earlier, and I think it was actually Tim B, is that there's customizability within the accessibility helper. So you can turn off entire zones of the keyboard so they're not announced, so that users who don't want those things to talk don't have them talk. Scott Chesworth mentioned it in the Reaper as well for Asara. So it wasn't actually a bug. You must have done it without realizing.
I think that was actually me. Sorry, Tim. So because when I was scrolling through presets, I like the way that you get a sound sample, but the speech goes over it.
Exactly.
So I had done this. I had press shift and whatever that button is to turn off.
It's that thing you get so used to your own setup where you just don't think about these things, right? So yes, very embarrassing, but good. Thank you, Jay.
It's all set and forget, and my setup is going to be different, for example, than this one. And tomorrow I'll be demonstrating this for everybody that comes to the accessibility zone, because I have my laptop and all my sounds upstairs, and I can't wait to show you guys this in person for those of you who are interested to see it.
But the evidence there, and it's good evidence, is that those settings were remembered when the keyboard was turned off and back on, because I did that yesterday when I was doing the tech check for this and forgotten that I changed it. So sorry, but that's great. That actually, if people do set the keyboard up how they want it, those settings will be remembered. They don't have to keep resetting the accessibility settings.
Exactly. And again, that's a new thing to have that kind of customization. We did have that particular thing earlier, but the rest of like turning zones on and off and things like that, that's again a recent capability, something we couldn't really do before without getting deep into the code of the actual software. But now that sits above everything, it's just much easier, these kinds of things, so much more scalable.
Cool.
So
we've got
lessons learned.
Time for probably one more closing thought from the panel, or one more question from the crowd.
Hi. I'm trying to frame this as a question. Maybe it's just an idea, and I'm wondering how useful it is. One of my professional roles is to work with interoperability standards. And this example of one user setting things in such a way that the next user was confused made me think about, connect this to the idea of an accessibility rider. Would there be any use in having sort of a portable configuration format for software, music software, hardware software, that could say, okay, these are the way I set up this software, and maybe, all right, it's an accommodation for color blindness, or it's the font should be bigger, or the knob should be less twitchy, or whatever it is. But is there any utility to that, and would it be worthwhile for the industry to try to have something like that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that is one of the next steps, is creating those standards. We see it in people's phones with any app now with light and dark mode, and that setting being inherited from the operating system level. And I think, is there a way for people to export their settings and load them?
You could probably do it from the OS, but there isn't a kind of user-facing version of that. But I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah,
in general, this idea of accessibility riders, I mean, you're quite right.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, and that is a big topic that we spoke about last year, actually, is people taking their settings with them, and the mobility that affords you as a traveling engineer. And that's one of the things that I struggled with working in studios, was going into one, after feeling very comfortable, but then it being a totally new environment in the next one, if you know what I mean, and having to set up all that stuff again. I would love it to be able to carry my settings with me across different hardware and software. Any more thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and I think that's the stuff that really makes it possible for people to be professionals, working professionals. And at the moment, that's really, really challenging, because even if you've got it set up on your own personal rig, you simply can't do that in another place. So that sort of transportability will make a radical difference to people being able to get employment, have jobs, have careers that at the moment is sometimes impossible.
Amazing. Well, we do need to be out of here at 5 pretty sharpish. So I'm just going to wrap us up there and say thank you very much to everyone here, but especially everyone who's been on the panel and presented throughout the afternoon. So thank you, everyone. Round of applause, please.